All right, Miss Wilson? Well,
The
and
mayor
I was
gonna be
gonna
with us
say,
today?
the mayor will
No.
not be here, nor will Mr. Davis be with us today. And I can do it, or does anybody else want to do the invocation? Oh, okay.
We're on preacher time today.
All right. Reverend McDowell, would you like to, I know you're just getting in, would you like to do the invocation?
As penance.
Let us pray. Lord, we pray for patience. We pray for guidance. We pray for all of the things that are needed to enhance and grow this city of ours. Bless each one of us individually and collectively. We ask it in your name. Amen.
Amen.
I've been waiting since 9 o'clock for you to get
Man,
here. Where you been?
she called you. Did you call him? Did he show up?
I was here.
Okay, well, good afternoon.
Hey.
We will get started with city council discussion items, and we're actually gonna jump right into our fiscal year 2019-2020 budget workshop, which I'm so sorry, I meant to tell Missy we would be doing that, because there's several things in front of her. We're holding the 2020 Census Complete Count Committee update, for Mayor Benjamin to be present for that. And then the Comets fiscal year 2019-20 budget presentation with Mr. John Ando. Hopefully we will get to it, but he's having some travel, issues, so I think
Was he taking the bus?
we just had that discussion.
Had a
Well,
flat
I mean,
on,
there's plenty of room.
Sounds like he may need
Had a
to
flat-
take the bus versus his
had a flat on
plane.
the bus.
And this is my fault, I should have told Missy we would be skipping those two items, so she's coming. As you know, we've been discussing this general fund discussion and H-tax and A-tax, but particularly general fund, is going to really center around some budget alternates to go over with you all that factor in some of the discussions that we've been having with you regarding revenue generation options. Obviously, you all are well aware that some of those revenue generating options require some more due diligence, like audits of various entities, their business license, payments, what they should be paying, what they may not be paying. We're gonna start immediately with the low-hanging fruits. So there are businesses right now that we know, just due to enforcement, we can probably estimate an increase of $2 million. But there's some other bigger ticket items like universities, hospitals, et cetera, that you all have directed us to look into and be very specific and purposeful, and hopefully get some information where we can begin to have discussions with some of those entities, and or go through an audit process where by January we can then have a better feel for how much revenue could be generated. That would then take some of the burden off of all of the other entities that have always been paying taxes, and these are non-taxable entities that we're talking about. So the goal would be to show you a budget that is still not in balance either way, that already factors in the $2 million of the low-hanging fruit from business licenses, just enforcement that we think we can generate. But it's still not in balance, even by doing that, and Missy's gonna go through from where we've come, because we were kind of far out of balance after looking at the department's budget requests with maintainer. We're in a maintain services, there is some expansion of services and things we know we would like to do, but we've come down to about being $3 million out of balance, but obviously we'll get in balance before it's time to vote on a budget. And then there's a second option that will show you where we factor in what we've called a public safety fee that we could implement now as well. And we'll show you some of the things that we could tie to that public safety fee. The difference with that fee is that it would be charged to everybody. And I know the direction of this council has been to really zone in on those non-taxable entities which is gonna take, as I just explained, a little more due diligence to do that. But at the same time, we wanted to show you what it would look like and potentially generate about 2.5 million, right, Jeff? I think I'm talking off the top of my head, the public safety fee. If it's $5 per month per parcel. So that's just something we're gonna show you, and with that, we're gonna also tie that to various public safety initiatives that we need to do right now, whether it's security cameras or several things that are clear public safety needs. Then that third option will show you factors in by January the audit with the business license approach, as well as the non-taxable entities. That would then give us the option of factoring in some of the other, like the memo I sent you last night with code enforcement officers that are needed. Chief Holbrook's presentation last budget workshop with the competitive pay, and some of the bigger ticket personnel-driven public safety needs. So that, we're just trying to show you kind of a scaled approach. It doesn't, you know, I've really taken into account this public safety fee that we can implement now, that it would hit everybody at $5 a month, but with the things that we've been talking about, I really do feel, and the needs we have, y'all are almost gonna have to have a smorgasbord approach. There's not one right now silver bullet that's going to address everything. So we're just trying to show you various options.
Would you
Yes.
go ahead and amend the business license ordinance to remove the exemption for a nonprofit?
Yes.
Are we doing that right away?
Well, we can go ahead and do that, but the work still has to be done as
Yeah.
far as
I think
the
we gotta
audit.
audit, and we gotta take a look at what other cities are doing, and it may involve us, but we have to bring everybody to a level playing field. I do think that if we're looking at, a user fee or whatever the terminology is that can go to the general fund, that can affect public safety, which includes, you know, not just police and fire, public works and other things. I think we have to, part of that audit not only needs to be of business license, but also property, because looking at that list that we've gotten, there are a lot of questionable things that we need to update. The other thing is, I think that, you know, looking at a couple different options that other communities are doing should be put into the fold. If it's a flat rate business license fee that incorporates everybody, and that's based on gross receipts, you know, how that would affect, you know, everybody from the university, the hospitals, to et cetera, you know, but also looking at, I mean, we've got over $1 billion in higher education off the tax rolls. We've got, you know, state government, which other state governments, host city gets a check from state government to help balance. I mean, we're talking about close to, you know, $4 billion of non-tax paying property, 100% tax paying, not partial in our city. So, you know, I do think we have to look at that. And I think the audit helps us handle that low-hanging fruit that we've talked about, you know, just making sure that, you know, things are enforced, but, you know, both on the property tax as well, because we've seen a lot of properties change hands that no longer have nonprofit status, and some of them may be condo, where you have businesses operating out of a nonprofit status. Well, you can't run a business and be nonprofit at that point, you know, where you're collecting, if it's a coffee shop or if it's a school or whatever. I think we've got to look at that. But I think there's some real options out there, but to me, the difference will be there is by attacking it correctly. We ought to see some significant revenue by involving everybody, so everybody's invested in the service that we bring. We're not looking for money to pay for other things, but for the basics. And I think it's important, you know, water and sewer is not the place for that. It's got to be one of these entities, and I think we can see that historically. in other communities, so I think the audit is our first step. Until we know where everything is, I think that's our first step for sure.
Let me just make sure I'm getting some clear feedback too on the ordinance question though, which I know legal has a draft, right, it's ready. So are you all suggesting that as we continue, as we start the audit process, go ahead and get the ordinance passed?
Yeah, and I would go
I
ahead
think that
and
would be the
repeal the
first
other
step,
part.
right?
That's first step though,
That's the
right?
first step.
That's step one.
And that's
Right.
where the 2 million coming from, it's because you're going after some of the,
No.
Is it 2 million?
That's not,
That-
we don't know what it, we
that's
don't know
not-
it yet, we
yeah.
don't have
what is
until
the,
we do the
what is the
audit.
2 million
So
loan?
that, I was buying time for Missy, cause I'm
Okay.
so sorry, I forgot the other two items were, one
Yeah,
is
I'm so-
rolled
and
off,
my
and the other
apologies
one's
too,
not
yeah.
here, so.
Ms. Wilson.
My
We're gonna go
apologies.
through that, cause it is confusing, there's like 3 different things we're talking about right
Right.
now, and we're gonna try to explain that to
Now,
you.
let me ask this, Ms. Wilson. You look at the public safety fee, $5 a month or $60 a year.
That's the option that we're gonna present.
We can't do that. That doesn't get us anywhere.
Yeah, what's the possible revenue?
2.5.
2.5 mil, right? We're gonna hear some more about that as a part of the options. Missy, you gonna be doing that today?
Yes, sir. With,
All right.
along with, I'm sure several other in the room, but yes, sir.
But that's low hanging.
But it's
I
not.
shouldn't say low hanging fruit, but the $2.5 million represents revenue.
Unfortunately, we're talking.
But you're talking about,
one segment.
you're talking about $2.5 million. But you're also talking about revenue that has, I mean, it's low hanging. I mean, it generates income.
If the
But
council
it's-
has the will to do that, but it would be applied to everyone. And I
See,
know wasn't initially what you all
We can't do-
directed, but it is something based off, I think, once you see the context of what this budget is looking at, that we felt like we had to at least put on the table
So
as well as
can we do the
option.
budget presentation and then come back to
Sure.
this conversation after we've seen all the recommendations?
Thank you. And again, my apologies for the tardiness. You have a copy of the presentation in front of you, and the memo was attached to the budget. We can just get started right on. We're going to talk today about the general fund, the hospitality tax, accommodations tax, and then the budget schedule as we are today. For the general fund, a few notes we wanted to make sure we spell out in terms of direction when departments are preparing their budget. Of course, they are preparing their budgets with the goal of providing high-quality municipal services as guided by Envision Columbia focus areas. The requested budget, which is what's before you today, again, I want to stress that's the requested budget, not the proposed city manager budget, reflects the request from departments, less reductions for new or expanded programs. With that being said, what that means is that current service levels, current programming is maintained in this requested budget as we have it today. With that as well, the budget is not in balance. And we will plan to talk with you through today about where we started with the budget and then where we are to get to the point of where we are today. Starting out with general fund revenues, and most of the material that you have today was presented to you in the budget memo, but do want to make sure everyone has a chance to hear what we are starting with and what we're working from. So the total proposed revenues and transfers in is $152 million, which is an increase of $4 million, or about 2.7%. What makes up that number comes from revenues, which is $132 million, or 2.8 million increase, or 2.2. That means those are revenues: property taxes, business licenses, permit fees, other service charges. Then we have transfers in, or other financing sources and uses, which total $19.9 million and are an increase of $4 million, or 2.7. Property taxes is the single largest source of revenue in the general fund. Those are projected at $59 million, an increase of 1.6, or 2.8%. As we've talked in prior conversations, we as staff are not comfortable that revenue growth in property taxes from sources of property taxes is growing at a level to sustain the growth in the overall budget. Of course, there are a couple of things that add into those fixtures with regards to caps on millage rates or caps on property taxes or property values. And then, of course, we have sustained property tax millage rates for 10 years. There is no proposed property tax included in this budget. 98.1. Yeah, reassessment, and then I was gonna mention, reassessment
happens
this year for Richland County and next year for Lexington. So, yeah, so millage will change this year, but as we've done in the prior years, our historical reassessment years with, whenever Richland County is doing reassessments, we roll back millage to maintain current levels. We don't roll it back and include a millage, or has not included millage increase. So, just to keep that point. Business license revenues are projected at $42 million, which is a net increase of $722,000. That's a net because we have projected a decrease from the franchise fee of about $1.6 million. But we have, which means we would have had an overall reduction in our business license projections. However, the $2 million that we are discussing now, reflected in business license, is a result of enforcing or enhancing enforcement of our current business license ordinances. That's where the existing $2 million come from.
I mean, I hate to interrupt, but what does that really mean? We've never enforced that before, and now all of a sudden we're enforcing it?
We have been enforcing them. It's a matter of being more direct with some of our enforcements, or maybe following up on some of our enforcement efforts. For instance, finding businesses that currently are not paying property taxes, business licenses that should be. I don't know if Jeff or Jan want to add any anecdotal about some prior experiences, but usually that means of.
One of the good sources of revenue that we probably are not tapping is the vendors that come into the city to
Yes.
service some of our industries, hospitals and others. So if you get a list of the vendors that are operating out of, is it Prisma? Prisma, and check them against the ones that are licensed by the city of Columbia, you will come up with a list of those that are not licensed. And all of them are doing business in the city of Columbia.
I understand that, and that actually competes with the businesses who does proper pay business license fee and everything else. My point is, why are we not addressing that before? I mean, if it was.
Well, if we had told the staff to focus on searching every nook and cranny for people that are not properly paying their business license, well, they might have gotten to that. But I think we have not been strong on enforcement in some of these areas that are the low-hanging fruit.
Okay. And then service charges and other revenues, there's a combination of items that make up those dollars. Those are coming in at $30 million. That is where state shared revenue is pointed out in the materials that you were given. We have projected a slight increase in state shared revenue, but it's very minimal compared to where we should be collecting on state shared revenue.
Can you go back to the reassessment year? Is the reassessment year going to be part of the millage this year or next year's budget?
It'll be this year's millage. It'll be on the 2019 tax bill.
Yeah, it's just the one in October, November, it'll all be rolled back.
This October? Yeah. Well, we might need to discuss that then, because we have a way to recoup back 3 years of millage. So if it comes up that we have 6 mills available to be rolled back, and the reassessment says you need to roll back 3 mills, we could increase our millage by 3 mills and come up with the same 98.1 and gain additional revenue.
Correct.
So we need to look at that as a possible revenue source, rather than saying we're gonna automatically roll it back to whatever the reassessment is.
And we agree with you, it's just historically, this council has not opted to do that.
Well, this is not a historical council.
Well, that's why Missy, I think, said it the way she did. I mean, we.
My only
Totally
problem with
agree.
that is you're taxing the same
Same
who
people,
are
that's
already
right.
paying. And you got,
Well,
you
we
got
gotta
a
even that
whole
out
group
a
of
little bit.
people that come in here and are using all the services and not paying. And that's just, you can't pay your director $200,000 a year and say you have no money to share in costs. It's not right. Telling you.
Well, it's also hard to fix.
No,
very-
it can be
it's hard to
fixed. The
fix.
state's already given us the avenue to do it.
It's hard to get your millage back, particularly when this body has not raised taxes for over 10 years.
And I was gonna say, that's
So,
not, that's my
it
only
is-
point on
it-
that.
I do have to
Yeah.
say, that is not necessarily the most responsible approach to not raise taxes incrementally for years and years and years and years and years and years, and allow it to not roll back. But like, it's a philosophical thing.
But I would
But I
argue.
think you have to do both. I mean, absolutely, that's our first directive, is to
No,
address the
but you have,
non-taxable.
we may not have gone up on our millage rate, but we have gone up on everything else. We just feed people differently. We can't blind ourselves and say we haven't gone up on other fees. If you look at a tax bill from 10 years ago or 20 years ago and look at what's on it, what's included, and then look at fees and everything else, we have. I mean,
Yeah, but I think that's a little different. I mean, I think that.
I think you ought to look at it
Basic
before we say it.
services.
I mean, I think all that needs to be on the table, but I agree with Howard and Teresa in that to me, it's just the same thing with the water rates. When you say, okay, we're not gonna raise water rates this year, and then 2 or 3 years, you're realizing that you're gonna be hit. With the reassessment, this is an opportunity for us to look at where we are. If we keep saying we're gonna allow, ourselves not to recoup our millage, then as the city grows, we're on uneven playing fields. I just think we have
The
to-
difference in the discussion is that we have increased water rates every year since we needed to do it. And we've also stopped transferring as much money and doing all the things we responsibly need to do. The problem here is that we haven't addressed is all the people, the nonprofits and the non-tax paying entities. We haven't even addressed the half parcels.
Right.
We're just talking about that.
But nobody's
I-
disagreeing with
No,
that.
but my point is it'd be different to go back at the millage if we've come up with a plan and we've addressed the others, so that you have some kind of playing field.
So I think that all that needs to be on the table, but the thing that we also have to keep in mind is our window too, though. I mean, it's not like we have a reassessment every year, and so when that window closes, it closes. And so to say, okay, we're gonna be, responsible, we've gone up on this, and so this year, we're just not gonna address it, and then that window closes, and then we're not able to address it, for another 10 years.
It's
I mean,
gone for a
With
decade.
all due respect to everybody's opinion, I think, this council and every council in the past, we always go around and dance around the subject of the nonprofit not paying their share of providing services or revenue to provide services. I think there is enough council effort or will, as you say, that this is the year that you bring that to the table and bring it a reality. We can talk about millage rollback and, increasing franchise fees and all that stuff, that we still back to the same principle. Everybody have to pay their share, whether you're University of South Carolina, whether you're hospitals, whether you're anything, or government. We've gotta bring you have to not donate, or bring some kind of level of revenue or responsibility for us as a city government, give you the services you need. We come around and we dance about this subject every year around budget year. What are we gonna do about non-profits, or what are we gonna do about it? And we never come back to a reason. We balance the budget and we forget about it for another 6 or 8 months, and we bring it up again, and here we are again. So I just think that
And that's not
this
really
is the
accurate this
momentum.
year. The staff has done a great job. I mean, it's not something you can say automatically, today, this is what we're gonna do. I mean, I think the staff has spent the entire year to do the research. Now, I agree with you on, it comes up to this council to finally say, okay, yes, give them some marching orders, but we haven't wasted a year. I think we've gotten some really good information.
I didn't mean it wasted a year. I'm just saying every year we talk about it, we end up not. I mean, I remember when Steve Benjamin was running for mayor 10 years ago, that was his first thing, is the nonprofit. 65% of properties in the city do not pay taxes. I mean, everybody preaches about that. Let's make it a reality.
Well,
But Mr. McDowell, then Mr. Duval, and then back to Missy, so we can keep going.
So me, thank you. Mo, I think a part of that is, you're absolutely correct. I think a part of it is true. I think the difference now as opposed to what it was 10 years ago, I think that conversation and the intentionality of this conversation as it relates now to, let's just say it, churches and daycare centers and that sort of thing. I think the conversation now is more intensive and intentional. And I think if we sway off of that course and we get back into a laissez-faire kind of situation the rest of the year or next year or whenever, I think we are more driven now to at least put those kinds of options on the table as it relates to nonprofits.
With all
So-
due respect, Reverend, these options been on the table before, and yes, we're careful about churches. We are the policymakers. We can design an ordinance that we can take out churches out of it, put something else in it, or whatever we need to make the reality come true. The bottom is, we always struggle to find ways to tax or put fees on nonprofits so they can bring or contribute to the government.
Well, let me say it this way. I think
Finances.
it's more deliberate in terms of our conversation this year as opposed to what we've done in the past. Now, I can't go no further. I can't go any further than 3.5 years.
I understand that.
But that conversation, and I think you're right. It's ensued in such a,
Both points well
yeah,
taken.
thank you.
Mr. Duval, and then
Let-
let's get back to.
If I can put a period on this and
Yes,
I'm
sir.
done, and I'll listen to Howard.
Put a bow on it.
No, I'm gonna put a period. I think we're right, and I think the conversation is very much needed. I think Daniel has raised that, several of us have raised that. So I think the intent now is to go forward with that whole conversation, and it not be a back burner issue.
And my point is that the taxing of nonprofits or governmental entities or the things that you want to do to make an equal playing field is a question that has been before every city council in South Carolina for decades. None of them have come up with a legal,
Well, they ain't as
efficient.
smart as we are, so let's
Well,
just face
let me
that.
finish, Daniel. They have not come up with an answer because there is no easy answer for it. And you will not find any easy answer around this council table either. We might think we have the brightest and the best, but there are a lot of others out there too, and it can't be done.
Well,
You need to listen to our staff and come up with things that can be done.
and
All right,
let
so
me address
I'm
that
not
for a
gonna end
second.
that
Hold on,
conversation. I
Mr.
can't end that conversation with
Mr.
that.
Rickman,
That is not
Mr.
true.
Fedor,
Mr.
and then
Duvall.
back to Ms.
Because I'm gonna tell you right now, the state opened up and gave us an avenue that more than one accountant that I've talked to in this city has agreed and actually shown me the path how to get there, so I beg to differ with you.
I can't wait to see the path.
Well,
It's pretty easy, you've been paying it every time you fill up.
path or no path, the Columbia is a unique city, unlike any other city in the
But
state.
we operate under the
We are-
same laws as the
I
other
understand, but
cities.
when you have 65% and more of properties that do not contribute a dime to our tax base or our expenses to run this government, there gotta be somewhere that we, I don't know that,
You
I
gotta go down to
understand
Main
Missy
Street
and
and
the staff.
pass a law.
I understand Missy and the staff is gonna go through some options to generate revenue, I'm fine with that, but I am not gonna give anybody or put another $5 fee on residents who are already paying 100% of the city's expenses or revenue to operate our services. I know it's $5, I know it's $60 a year, that's not the point. The principle of the matter is, you cannot keep adding more fees and more taxes to the people already paying their fair share.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank
You know what, this is really good that we all,
Yes, it
it really is a good dialogue. So if we get out of whack, Reverend, I appreciate the prayer, what is it, patience?
Patience.
Teach us patience.
Patience, my dear friend.
Okay. All right, so proceeding on, just another look at our revenue streams in terms of the sources. Sometimes I know folks are visual. I know I am to visually see, again, how much property taxes and business licenses make up the city's revenue streams. And then just demonstrating where we have some increases. Next, we'll talk a little bit about the requested budget that was provided to you. The requested budget totals $155 million. It's an increase of 7.3 or 5%. It's still out of balance by $3.3 million. It has to be in balance before we actually have first reading and public hearing. It requests the department's budgets as they submitted them, less new programs and increases or expanded programs.
And Missy, is this presentation, does this presentation actually tell us what the new and expanded programs that are not included but requested are?
We actually are going to provide that to you on a separate sheet.
Okay.
It'll be easier to read.
And so when we do that, Ms. Wilson, as we continue to have this conversation, I just think that that's important information that we continue to get in the public domain as well, as what we are doing without, based on.
And to that, Ms. Devine, as well, is trying to not convey that we're shutting down programs or stopping programs. Right now, this presents just expanding or adding new. Maintaining services is really what we're trying to do within the budget that will be passing. So the budget, when we actually started on the budget, it says that in excess of 10 million, but you're gonna see we started out with a deficit of about 13 million. Through combinations of some additional revenue adjustments along with expenditure reductions, we brought the balance closer into 3.3 million. So far, we've made about $5.5 million reductions in new and expanded programs from departments' budgets. We started out with a $2 million amount in the budget for potential cost of living or merits. We've scaled that back to $1 million in anticipation of possibly doing a mid-year implementation. City Council has been very gracious in supporting the city manager's proposal for merits and cost of living previous years. As you know from our prior compensation surveys and compensation studies, it cost us to maintain, or if we drop below on those levels, it costs us again when we try to catch back up. It's just like your rates and your revenues. So this helps us to keep some levels of adjusting our pay scales.
And so just by way of a reminder for council, we initiated the merit system again this past fiscal year.
Right.
So that means we've re-educated, we've, gotten staff to now all be on a simultaneous evaluation system, same time of the year, every August, September. Certainly, if this isn't something we can maintain this year, then we won't be able to. The problem with that is what Missy is saying, is once you get employees back into the train of thought of, I'm being evaluated, that means something, my work means something, to kind of go back and forth with that is problematic. But again, we're just showing you areas, as Ms. Devine mentioned, where these are things that we'll lose, in a sense. The council requested project, I'll just go ahead and speak to that, Missy, is where we were going to put some funds for quiet zones. I know that was one of the council requested projects that was brought to our attention. I was originally thinking an $80,000 goal because Missy Gentry right here, and had, worked with the quiet zone committee. That was an amount that got us to an initial, just infrastructure-wise within the city, some things that we could prep, for a full implementation of quiet zone. I think there's been some further discussions with some of our state legislators who, proposed that we're at more of a $500,000 level contribution. So we had put in $300,000. There are other council requested projects too. That was one that had kind of risen to the top of some of the discussions, being that the committee had done a lot of good work.
And it was also in the current year, so it shows a reduction in those for next year. This year we ended up using it for shot spotter.
Right, this year's budget, the council requested projects line was used for shot spotter implementation.
I didn't wanna bring the quiet zone discussion or anything like that. Let me just continue this train of thought. GO bonds, what is our capacity to borrow GO bonds?
I don't know if we have that number.
So
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to pull it off the top of, I'll have to verify the actual. So our capacity at the end of this past year, I think, was 15 million. Now, when I say it's capacity, it's legal capacity. It doesn't mean we have the revenue in place to make payment on those bonds. So there's two different things. So if we issue additional bonds, we will need additional revenue to make those payments. But under state law, we have roughly 15 million, and that'll increase somewhat this year as of June 30 as well.
So, entertain this idea, because I think this is something that goes back to something that Ed and I and everybody else has talked about, Station 2. My train of thought is to issue a GO bond to build that fire station on Fire Station 2, and then allocate maybe $1 million to the quiet zone. And maybe by then, we'll get other agencies to contribute into meeting that, to at least build the first phase of the quiet zone. My understanding, talking to the chief, the estimate for fire station, I don't know, 4 million, I think he said, somewhere around there. So if we issue a $5 million GO bond to address two important issues that has a lot to do with safety, I think that would be something that I would love council's approval or supporting that, and maybe y'all can come back with some numbers, whether the but the general fund can support the payment for that GO bond.
What would be the payment for a $5 million GO bond?
Less than 500,000.
What capacity did you just say?
It's still, though, needs
We-
additional revenue to make
Right.
that payment, though.
If you need
So
a
that's
$5
adding to.
That would be adding to our deficit.
Yeah, but
Our geo debt capacity is about 15 million, 15 million.
services.
So can we?
Thank
But
you.
he-
But that's not,
Yeah.
it's just an
Yeah,
idea.
it's just something to talk about when we get to discussion. Can we move on?
And in years past, I asked Jeff about this already, because I thought the language was put in there, but it was in a different bond. Because you all raised this for sidewalks one year as well. But I think that bond, I think the language is in the bond that's still. It was issued, but I think we used that bond.
So that bond was issued, 9 million was for Bull Street, 1 million though, at the time it was changed from sidewalks, it was changed to demolition for, out with CHA for,
Out
so,
Gonzalez.
but, and that demolition.
I thought it was in
occurred.
addition, I thought language was in there
much
for
are-
Gonzalez and
how
for
much is that
sidewalks,
box?
but he checked and it was just for
Our
Gonzalez.
debt
Yeah.
payment on Bull Street?
Top of my head.
Okay.
Well, when I figure out the 5 million here in a second, for some reason my phone froze, then it'll be roughly, I'll be able to figure out the
This is
rough
roughly
estimate of what we
30
pay for
million,
Bull Street.
right?
Well,
Because
okay, so when you
37,
ask,
30 of it's being paid by
so
hospitality.
for Bull Street, are you asking for the ballpark, because that was a $29 million
That's being
bond?
paid out of hospitality.
So that's roughly 2.6 million a year.
Right, and that, we'll talk about that in the hospitality budget.
That's in hospital, yeah, that's.
What
And
about
that comes out of hospitality.
infrastructure?
There is a $9 million, or $10 million total was the GEO bond from 2 years ago. I don't know off the top of my head the amount, but I'll get that amount.
Yeah, I mean, because we're at 30 million, which is what the bond payment is, and then get us to, by the next meeting, what the estimated property tax income is as well.
Okay, and then what, we did not discuss it here, but we did discuss in some prior budget.
To figure out what exactly we could propose, and Gloria was just kind of knee-deep in CDBG-DR at the time, so we said we'd have that conversation later. And so this might be a time, or for Michael to have that conversation, since he's kind of spearheading that. But I think having some developers who are willing to come to the table, that might not be about, you know, the money aspect of it, but we were talking maybe, you know, kind of a community service, housing blitz kind of thing. And I think that Earl would be willing to help us have that conversation with the bigger group of developers.
Okay, we can certainly reach out to him and do that.
And then
Many
we
of
also
those
talk about our
properties,
Chodos. I mean, I know Lexington has been really aggressive, I know, at reaching out to the different nonprofits who do affordable housing and saying, you know, hey, we've got these lots. They've also put some money in it too, but they've offered that, and I'm not sure if we've tried that on our actual affordable housing developers that they do this. I'm not sure who Mike was talking to, but I know that there are some that Lexington has been aggressively trying to get them to build, and they are doing that.
Well, we can certainly look at that. Many of the lots are actually in the opportunity zone as well, which adds another layer of attractiveness, that we are trying to use that as well to help incentivize.
But again, that incentive was, we didn't want counseling, we had forgotten the direction of the capturing the student housing, increment and putting that, you know, not just letting it go back into the general fund, but putting it or segregating it towards affordable housing incentives. We just don't know that we can afford to do it this year.
Nor to make this think that the city doesn't have other programs that we're still continuing to do and maintain, like Missy's talked about, with not just the development corporations, but with our loan programs, the community development, and some other means. This was just that infusion there, as Ms. Wilson pointed out. Okay. Next, external requests. We did want to point out that we do have a number of external requests that are in the budget that have requested some additional increases. The public defender, we, by proviso a few years ago, municipalities using public defenders are required to fund public defenders, so we allocated $100,000. I think this is coming up will be the third year for those funds. They have requested an increase in 1920 to the amount of $225,000, which reflects the cost of 2 attorneys plus the fourth of another attorney. The solicitor, the current allocation is for $215,817, and a request for 1920 of $343,498. This request has been considered before. We've maintained them at the same level. That's what's reflected in the budget. So what's reflected in the budget right now is their current allocation, not their increased allocations. So I make sure that's clear when we're talking about balancing the budget. The budget already reflects them at current year levels. The Richland County Detention Center, just to point out, the current rate is 55. It does go up to 71 starting July 1. That's not the final of that increase. The increase, that's the capped amount of what they set in terms of setting the dollar amount. After that, it will then go up to be equivalent to what their cost of services are.
Ms. Wilson, can you please have the county provide us the last 10 years worth of financial information on the jail? Because 10 years ago, the rate was $25 a day. It's currently, they're rated, we have asked, I know I personally have asked for the last, I don't know how many years for the financials, and we haven't got it.
We will resubmit that request.
I also would like to discuss with legal a contract around the detention center as well at the appropriate time. I think there needs to be some further discussion, and I'd like to try to have a small group with some of the reasonable folks over at the county to talk about it.
So,
You did say reasonable.
the $71 is it already estimated in the new budget?
Yes. Current levels of where we're
How much
funding
is
now.
How much increase is that?
It's not actually increase in the budget because what we budgeted
No,
for.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. How much is the increase from the 55 per night to the 71 total increase in the budget? From
So
current
the-
year to next year?
So the budget, we have budgeted the same amount this year as we will next year because what we've expended so far is maintaining, and it has for the past 2 years. So right now, it's just holding at current levels in anticipation that the amount we are budgeting for will accommodate the 71, based on, again, prior year history of number of inmates per day.
So it's the same X amount of dollars
Right,
this year and next year, even though the rate has changed. Got it.
correct.
Okay.
We think the dollars will sustain themselves there. Of course, that's not our only external request, but we did want to point out these in terms of external requests that are requested increases. The other external request, I would say, would be homeless services, and those aren't really external. Those are services that the city has either contracted or agreed to help fund. Those are maintained at $1 million in the office lease. Okay. So as been discussed, and some of this information is familiar with council, and just to continue making sure everyone's on the same page with regards to what our challenges and opportunities. And this past year has been very educational for staff. It has been very informative. We've learned a lot. We've learned a lot more information about our parcels, about our business licenses. There's also means there's a lot of information that we don't know and that we will need to work on getting by ways of audits or other sources of information. But we do want to reiterate that we're working from the fact that nonprofits are located in Columbia, and that there's a desire to shift some of the burden of our service cost to other non-paying, non-taxed entities, whether they pay a business license or whether they pay a property tax. Our millage rate, as we've reminded folks, is 91.8, and it represents only 20% of a property tax owner's total tax bill. Property taxes generate $57 million. And then we also do have a source of revenue from fire rebate that's set by the county. Public safety functions, as we pointed out, are prior to actually proposed for next year between their operating budgets plus their capital lease expenditures are 50% of our total general fund budget. So of course, public safety makes up a large portion of our budget. So we're trying to look for ways that we can increase our overall assessed values in order to increase revenues based on our existing millage. How do we increase property values, add to the overall tax base, and then how do we generate revenues that cover the cost of operations and prepares the city for growth? We wanted to remind what we've looked at with regards to tax parcels. We have approximately 46,000 parcels in Richland County. Of those, 4,300 are non-tax, which is about 10%. But when you look at the taxed assessed value, 12.8 billion of our total market value, 27% of that, or 3.4 million, is non-taxed at all.
That's 100% non-taxable.
Right.
That
That's
doesn't include the partials.
Right. That doesn't include the partial
number's
non-taxed.
larger.
Right. But when we also do get homestead exemption revenues from the state for a portion of that too.
3.4 billion?
Million. Yeah, billion. I'm sorry, yes, billion. Mhm. Yes. That's a B.
It's
Is
interesting,
non-tax.
if you look, if you go to your next
next one
slide,
is right.
It's very interesting if you go in and break it down per parcel, what the average value is.
Right.
You know, I was a little shocked at the Homestead. The average value is $268,000 per parcel. A lot larger than I thought it would be.
Yes. True.
Well, and if you keep thinking trend-wise, as, you know, we're living longer,
Yeah.
that's just gonna
Keep increasing.
Right. So the chart that is displayed with this information is based on the parcel numbers, not necessarily the total market value numbers, but it's still proportional. And as you can see, the largest source of non-tax parcels are homeowners and homestead exemption.
So higher education and state offices are almost the same value at $1 billion.
Yeah, state,
Correct.
the state's about 7.7. Higher education is roughly 2.6. But higher education, you know, you got 55,000 students between the 4 universities that are here, and then the state government, and then the hospitals. So the people who are using the general services of the city are bulk in about 4 categories.
It's the pump station.
What's miscellaneous?
Miscellaneous, trying to remember what we included in that.
Just give us a list later, that's fine. I'm just
Okay.
curious, it's 102 parcels, so I'm sure it's kind of sporadic, but I'm just wondering.
There's 1,900 pages on
I think that was
spreadsheet.
railroads, maybe railroads,
Okay,
and
so
there's
like
also,
easements and
there's
stuff.
some properties, some of the commercial properties that get state, some state rebate type of things. But it, oh,
We got it by parcel to me.
wrong one, yes. So this in itself was a very useful information and very informative through this process in itself.
So, since we have already,
Go ahead.
since we have all this data and all information already, what audit are y'all looking for? Because Because it looks like you've got all the information you need here. You just need to kind of make up our mind to see what we want to do.
But see, Mo,
It's gotta be.
I think there's a deeper, because, you know, it was interesting as I went through some of the parcels, on the sheet, and I looked at, there's a shopping center that was owned by a church. It's no longer a functioning church, but they're renting out the spaces to other people. Well, they're not paying property tax, so doing an audit would give us a clear of what's truly non-taxable, or how it's being used, or do you go in and condo? You know, we've got a non-tax paying entity that's running a full-fledged catering and event space out of it. Well, if 80% of what they're doing is not religious, then they ought to pay 80% property tax, because they're competing against the private sector on unfair conditions. So I think you have to have an audit to confirm. I mean, no, these are straight off from the auditor, but I don't know when the last time it was audited.
Right.
I think the county and the city ought to join forces with Forest Acres and everybody else and go and audit all these parcels. I mean, out of 1,300 homesteads, I mean, some of those, somebody pointed out a parcel to me in your district that the person has passed away. The grandkids have the property, but they kept the name and everything somehow through documentation. They're renting it out. So, I mean,
But they didn't probate the estate.
I guess not.
That's not,
Well,
is that legal?
yeah, you don't have to. I mean, that's why we have heirs property and everything else. You don't have to probate the estate. But again, if it's not owner occupied, what would happen is if the house is, if they never probate the estate,
They
the
have
house
it.
is still in the name of the person's deceased, then I would imagine that that's for the county to, you know, assess them at 6% if it's not owner occupied. Because technically that's what it
It
is.
should be, but not, I don't think, obviously, I don't think the county or the city has the wherewithal
Yeah,
to
the
really go
resources.
back and resources and go
See,
audit all
and
this.
that's,
And I think
and that's what the audit, that answers your question, really, is the resources.
is to make
Because you
sure
have
that,
to-
you know, as we forge forward, we're doing it correctly and identify it.
I feel like if you pass an ordinance and you send them a bill, your audit will come back automatically to you and say, oh, wait a minute, that's not what I'm doing.
Well, and we don't send the property
we don't
tax
know
bills.
it.
We don't send the property tax. So we're talking about two audits too. We want to make sure we're clear. We're talking about two audits.
We have cleaned up a lot of that with the rental ordinance.
Yes.
David and his team get reports back probably from the neighbors. I know I've sent him several.
What, 22,000 now?
And that doesn't, but there are plenty that aren't registered.
But I mean, from where we were.
But we're getting,
Yeah.
we've done a lot in the last 2
But-
years.
I mean, the ordinance gave fuel for that, man.
They're not paying 6%?
Wow. If we said 8,900 that aren't paying 6% already.
900, what,
Since the rental ordinance started.
what was that now?
Properties.
Yeah, so those are the type of things we find. The only thing and I know this is maybe a little bit extra work, but when we do this and do the public hearing, just for folks to zone in, if maybe Missy, you can get an intern, maybe to just change the order in which you have the categories and either list it based on either the highest, the dollar, highest.
That's easy.
top, and it's just so people don't have to kind of look in, because you're like, oh, kind of going back and forth.
Sure.
I just think looking at the list, you know, going after higher education and the hospitals, and that we know that they are nonprofits, and we know that they're not contributing much to the services or the revenue of the city. It's, you know, maybe reach out and go after them first.
Well,
And
the thing, and I've said that too, to say, even if from the standpoint with the university and Prisma, to begin the negotiations there, and I was saying, well, that, you know, we're gonna do the audit, but we ought to at least start there. The issue still becomes how they report their earnings. So because they haven't had to, that's, I think, what Jeff and Janice are saying is, I mean, it's not so simple as just us throwing them. We need to go with them with some basis, just because they're just gonna say, okay, well, what are you basing that on?
Flat rate
What are you
business
basing-
license across the board,
Well,
nonprofit
if
and
that-
profit.
Again, I think that's getting back to Mr. Duvall's point of there's just no silver bullet with this as to what's been, well, I mean, the legal
Oh, it's well, first of all, it's gonna be multiple things, but we can't, you know, assessing a $5 fee on everybody is not the solution. We have to,
But, you know, you've
But-
got entities that have foundations, so there's hospitals, shift money to foundations, and
find a way.
university funds.
I mean, that's
So
what,
again, for our staff, it's gonna take some work. I mean, we're gonna have to figure out how to get to those numbers, and it's doable.
I think
no
you
doubt
need to
about
send
it.
them a bill and let them come back with challenging the bill and say, this is what we make, this is what we do, and show me how you calculated this bill, and we'll go from there.
I just don't think it's that easy.
Yeah, I mean, you've got all the hospitals now with all the doctor's offices inside the hospitals.
That's
so you
number
wanna
one.
capture
I mean, yeah.
that, you know, it's,
That-
it all needs to be done. We are agreeing with you.
Right.
And I think to the point of earlier, that this year, we've made a lot of progress, and it's more purposeful, like directed, y'all go figure it out, but to say that we just, right now, today, have done this audit.
gonna take 6 months.
It takes about, at least it'll take.
we're
that
looking
long.
at stuff with being able to assess whatever comes out of it. It's gonna be January. It's gonna take us this fall and all the way from now to the fall to really do it, so that we do have the research and the basis to assess. But yes, I mean, everybody is gonna contribute. We gotta level the playing field.
And the only reason, because we were just putting it all on the table, that we are also, and I guess we're about to kind of segue back into that with the user fee, public safety, or whatever, because that is something that we can probably do right now, as well as if you want to consider the rollback on the millage. I mean, those are things that state law wise, or us figuring it out, or auditing, those are doable things. So that, we're just trying to put everything on the table. It's not that we're, you know, trying to focus you in on that versus the other, because we know you want the other done first.
So do we.
We do too.
So, and just to make sure we're talking to make sure we're trying to keep our minds clear, the non-tax parcels, the audit on that, as Mr. Rickman pointed out, would either take some kind of collaborative effort, at least with the county, if not the county and others. It's not whether or not the city wants to do it. I think there's some conversations about who we would actually do it and how we would go about doing it. The audit on the business license is another story.
I get it. I get the two differences.
So, well, not just for you, but I think for all of us, because I know we keep talking.
Yeah, we confused ourselves.
Yes, we talk back and forth, yeah, and then the 2 million from current ordinances is also, adds to that mix as well. So I know that we are already talking a little bit about the public safety fee, and so what we wanted to talk about was, this was to address part of what council asked us for, and that was helping us to address our public safety costs and being able to help support some of the public safety initiatives and efforts that we know our departments are needing, that are definitely helping in terms of providing those services to the community on a daily basis. So what we have proposed, or what we are considering, is a $5 per month fee that would be used only for public safety equipment and technology, and that would be new services or new expenditures. We've projected that if we were to do $5 a month for starting July, it would be generating 2.5 million. Should we not move forward with that, or if we look at another date or later date, we would have to adjust that amount collected for this coming fiscal year.
Missy, how are we, people who don't get tax bills, how are we?
This would actually be on our water and sewer bill, just the same as like a stormwater fee would be.
It would be on the water bill?
Yes, sir.
So with the USC, for example, they get one water bill?
It's, yeah, it's parcel, same way we would do stormwater fees right now.
So how much would that generate in revenue, just for USC complex between all the
Not
water
enough.
meters and?
We didn't look at specific parcels, we applied it across. And yes, we understand about the,
USC ought to be paying us $5 to $7 million a year. I mean, yeah, I appreciate, I think that you can't, if you start proposing a $5 fee on the water bill, you're never gonna be able to get to the level or use the public safety to get to where we really wanna get, which is bringing the level playing field. I think this is an option that needs to be just left on the table, but until we've explored the other, I think if you go down this path, we're not gonna get to where we need to be. And we're basically, you know, the majority, the bulk of the people who will be paying it are the people who are paying for it again. They're paying for it already. We're double taxating our own folks.
Let us get through it and show you some
Can I-
items that would be
Can I just
eligible.
throw in an idea, or just, and I know we've discussed this before, but for some reason it never got any legs. So the stormwater fee that we give, every resident, or every water meter, or whatever, it's calculated, so it's calculated one flat fee for residential, and then it's calculated for square footage for commercials.
For impervious area of a commercial.
So why can't we use that same formula to do the public safety fee? Because, I mean, if you're gonna impose, or you're suggesting $5 per household for residential, that's only $1.50 less than what you would pay for the stormwater. So, I mean, I think if you can figure it out where it's still $5 per household, but use that same formula to do for square footage or whatever you do for the storm drainage, you're gonna generate at least $8 million. Because we're generating 10 million right now with the storm drain formula.
Correct. And it is based on a unit of measure on,
And that's
based on
an
a certain.
easier sell for my residents, for taxpayers, because that way you're really forcing people who's not paying anything to agree with this, rather than just $5 a meter.
You're
Crunch
saying
some numbers.
if there's a formula that's based off the equivalent square footage, but if they're under, whatever that line in the sand is and they don't pay it at all? Or still
They're still
everybody's
paying-
gonna pay?
Everybody pays it, because I don't think we've already determined legally you can't just do a public safety fee on some people or not. But if you can do a public safety fee based on the same formula or similar formula to the storm drainage fee that we imposed on everybody in the city, I think that would probably get us close to 8 million.
What he's saying is if you set a residential equivalent of $5.
Right.
And then if the business has a stormwater fee that's 10 times the residential equivalent, which is $5, they would be paying $50.
Do y'all support that?
And
Well,
that's
and,
on all businesses?
All everybody, including
I
USC.
I won't support that. Because those commercial guys are paying 6%, they're paying the top of the rate, plus all the stormwater.
But they're imposing the public fee, public safety fee. I mean, that's just.
But this is just an idea. This is, I mean, we have to vote on this. This is, to me, doesn't get us where we're going. If we're not generating $8 to $10 million based on what we already know, what the numbers and everything else say, then, you know, we're not gonna be able to address the things that we need in the general fund.
And we do wanna be able to get through the presentation to kind of show you at least the thought process on, even with the budget still out of balance, 3 million, including the 2 million of the low-hanging fruit business license, just the enforcement, we've included that. 2 million of revenue. Then we're gonna take you to the next column, and let's go to that, Missy, so we can.
It's only handout, I don't have it on the slides.
Right. But some of these new and enhanced
Right.
programs and things that will be, we just can't
we need
get
10
to,
million.
if we don't do something, and
Can I ask,
so.
is the park,
This is
at Bull Street scheduled to come online next year?
Yeah, next fiscal year.
What's the maintenance cost on that?
The staffing was about 200,000. That's just for the staffing.
Staffing?
It's the park ranger.
Park ranger.
Why are we,
For the Bull Street itself?
why are we staffing Bull Street Park?
would be a city
Park.
park.
It's gonna be.
We don't-
Handed it over to us this year. That's always been in the.
We are not staffing Finley Park, that is our premier park, and it looks awful. Awful. And we've given $67 million to Bull Street. And I was told that park was a low-maintenance, non-manned park. That's what I was told in January of whenever I got back here. And now I'm being told that we have to have park rangers
Nothing
and
is
people there.
non-manned and no maintenance, nothing.
Low maintenance. I
Well,
didn't say
maybe
no.
low,
That was,
but
I mean, I've
non-manned
heard
is
that
never
100
gonna be
times.
the case,
I am
so.
not willing to vote to spend one dime on park rangers or anything else until we have fixed the parks that we're responsible for first and foremost. This is an entity, we talk about shortage in budget. We're spending $3 million a year paying the debt over there, and we ain't making $250,000 worth of tax
Well, I
revenue.
think we would flex these rangers, Mr. Rickman.
Right, 'cause
too.
this
I
also
mean,
greenways.
We've got, there's a whole nother discussion that we'll talk about in executive session, but the Greenway by the zoo is coming online. I mean, the reality is, every time we have these discussions, this city is growing. It's moving, and we are not keeping up with the needs.
But
to
you're
keep up with
making my
them.
case for me. We are
I
growing, and
understand.
we are still trying to use our own money and our own people who are paying for everything.
You are in some ways, in
Yeah.
some ways you're not.
But, and let me just add this, I'm not saying I disagree 100% with what you're saying, because I think
Yeah.
a lot of what you're saying is true. But the other reality, and this is the point I was making with Mr. Davis before when we talked about the other parks and stuff, is that the reality is, if it is a city park, it will be a city, just like with what will happen at the zoo. You know, as we're growing, people like to be out, they like to be walking, running. Someone gets hurt on a city greenway, someone gets raped, someone gets murdered, that is on us. We had issue when someone was in Finley Park floating in the water, and people were looking at us like, what were you doing? I agree, Finley Park needs our attention. And I think the majority of us are willing to do what we need to do for Finley, but we can't neglect the other things that are gonna be our responsibility just because they happen to be located at Bull Street.
My point is that we never did, we budgeted, that I know of or seen, a budget for the maintenance of that. And for us to do Bull Street, the reality set for me again when we went down there the other day, and I hadn't been down there in months. And I'm walking around there, and we're talking about investing money. Well, how are we gonna maintain it? I mean, even if we redo Finley Park right now for $2 million or $5 million or, $25 million, how are we gonna maintain it? We don't have any maintenance money.
That's why we should impose the bid on that.
I guess that's where I'm struggling is that, we're spending a lot of money in an area and the question's been asked multiple times, and I think at the end of the day, I think we need to know who's contributing over there, because we're contributing everything.
I do not disagree with you a bit. We just have to react to the commitments that were already made. And so if a commitment's been made and it's coming online, and to Ms. Devine's point, I can't in good faith not bring that to your attention.
What's the dollar amount, do you know, Ms. Wilson?
For the maintenance of.
No, for Bull Street Park maintenance, do we have a budget?
I'll get Randy to pull it while we're in here. We do. And I don't think in this upcoming fiscal year, it's gonna be something, that we couldn't handle by also flexing that with bringing online the Sluter Greenway.
When
and
is
a
that
couple
going
other
on? Do
things.
we have, I know it's this year, but do we have it? Because that one's further along.
Right.
And when is that going to?
Well, that has had to do with that discussion we've had with the county about the amenities, and we're gonna talk about that.
Yeah, I think we've got to understand really what our ongoing maintenance is gonna be in these different areas, cause, you know, I mean, we're 5 years, 6 years into a deal over there at Bull Street. The roads are gonna have to start being fixed again. Curb and gutter's gonna have to be fixed and replaced. You know, all of these things, and we need to know what those numbers are, because the bill's gonna be due, and we're gonna have to budget for it, because we're not gonna generate it, I mean, not gonna generate enough revenue out of it.
And
to
the
pay for it.
$225,000 a year ain't gonna cut it.
We'll get that number for you.
Maybe Howard can answer that. What are the, I know we talked about this long time ago, about imposing a mid at the Bull Street. What are the legality part of that for the city to do that? Or you have to have.
It'd have to be a voluntary thing with a huge corporation. You can't impose it without them agreeing to it.
And we probably need to have that conversation,
That's
but can we
fine.
finish
That's all
the,
I-
can we
that's
finish
all I
the
wanted to ask.
presentation?
So any more discussion on so the public safety fee, what we want to make sure we're clear of is that the fee that we are talking about generating, the revenues would be used for a number of items currently not in the budget.
And so I did have a question on that. So, like looking at the list you have on here that are public safety related, you have on here security camera upgrades, shot spotter, competitiveness as far as the, police, men. And this amount you have on here is 1.9.
Right.
So that, the 2.5 would cover these things in here. Is that our anticipation?
That would be, those would be some of the items we would consider. Of course, those are expenditure, those are more than what the 2.5 would generate in 1 year, but those would be the type of expenditures and costs that we're looking at covering through a public safety fee.
Okay. I just want to know, if we have that discussion, we need to be very specific on what it's going to cover. We don't
Absolutely.
need people that anticipate it's going to cover, cameras and it doesn't, or X, Y,
Well,
Z.
yeah, we've got it
Right.
specific.
Right, and-
If we were to implement any of these options, we tried to be real transparent.
And
because
in-
that's,
Impose
I
that.
think the way that honestly citizens would agree to a fee or whatever, whichever option you go with, is if they know with specificity what it's paying for. At least I think that's what I've heard from citizens.
You're
I
right,
think
you're
some of you have said that as well.
And we wanted to try to make sure what we're clear on with regards to the public safety fee is that it's technology and equipment, not necessarily the personnel. Because if we're looking, because in order to try to meet what the personnel would, the
But
source.
legally, the way you justifying the public safety fee is because of the new expenses that you.
New and expanded services, yes. That's correct, yes, sir. Okay. Next is the
I'm sorry, before, just another thing for us to consider, as we talk about this, and Mr. Rickman brought this up, equating it like with the gas tax. Maybe we need to also look at numbers, like if we were to do maybe a higher dollar amount, but then a rebate for current property tax owners, and just see what the numbers give us.
I would like to add, just for clarification as well, so we will be advertising, sending the budget public hearing notice to advertise tomorrow. A public safety fee will require its own public hearing, which means so it sounds like there's not a decision to move forward to advertise this on Wednesday for June 11th.
I'm not for it. I don't know what everybody
Not
else
right this
is.
second, but I think we need to.
I couldn't not right now without further
We need to have a
conversation.
discussion before we leave today, yes or no, because just because you advertise it doesn't mean you're gonna implement it.
Right.
So if that's something that we're gonna talk about, we need to,
Well, I don't think you ought to list what's up there. I don't think if you want to talk about a fee, but I think you're creating a problem for us moving forward by saying a $5 per parcel public safety fee. I think I think we're leaving it's a mistake.
And so that's really, I think, where we're looking for some direction as to what to consider in terms of the schedule that we have before us. That doesn't mean you couldn't look at other dates, but to meet the June 11th, it would need to be sent to the paper tomorrow.
I just, I'm gonna say it again, because it just, until we've addressed other folks, I can't think you can keep going back to the homeowners and the people who have been paying and paying and paying.
And we agree, Mr. Rickman, wholeheartedly. I think what we're trying to do while we're having the discussions is put everything on the table, because what I don't want to happen is we do the audit and we get to January, and because of just historically and legally and various reasons, we're not able to do that for this, that, or the other reason. And so we're just trying to put everything on the table, whether you go with it now or not. Maybe the discussion is worth having had if we have to drop back and try something different. So these items aren't gonna change that are relevant to public safety. So we wanted to make sure we give you a little bit of foundation for the fact that I could go out and make the case at any of your public neighborhood meetings for any one of these items all day long and feel very strongly that it's necessary. And I think that an example of that is the memo which I want David to pass out. I sent you electronic copies of just code enforcement and the quality of life element that is a part of public safety. Robert has piloted a program that y'all don't even know about that we've been doing in some of our more challenged areas. And they've just been doing it off the cuff, just with no added resources, but it's quite a strain. And David references it in his memo. These are two really well put together briefing notes that are worthy of y'all taking a close look at if you haven't had an opportunity, but it goes exactly to these points. I don't know, Robert, if you brought copies.
Since we're throwing ideas, because we're still $3.3 million out of balance, can we not use the balance fund we had from general fund last year's budget, since we had $4 million surplus?
We've already accounted for those.
It was in the audit.
When she puts it in here, she's
It was in the audit.
It's out of reserved.
Yeah, you're using it, though. You're using a piece of it, yeah.
Yeah, and just to make sure
And
too.
have used some of it for some other things.
It was in the audit, $4 million. We were proud of that. That was surplus.
So we also want to make sure we're clear too, the public safety fee would not be used to balance this budget.
Can we, let's go through this so that
Okay.
they understand.
Right. So this, yeah, so the sheet that we've handed out to you talks about what revenues we're using to help us get to where we are in the budget and what expenditure reductions. That's the first column that says CM reductions. Then you can see we started out at 13.8, we're now at 3.3 in terms of shortfall still with balancing the next year's budget request. Moving over to the right, the public safety fee, that shows a revenue source of the 2.5 if that was a full year worth of collections, and then possible expenditures that would be used or utilized for those revenues. Those funds would not be used to balance this 3.3. They are separate. Just to make sure we're clear on that. And we'll come back to all these. I just want to sort of demonstrate to you what each column is. The column that says nonprofit business license, that's the one that would be based on the ordinance changes to the business license to allow for nonprofit entities to be charged a fee. We do not have an estimate on what those revenues are because we don't know what we don't know to be able to make this kind of estimates in terms of their revenues or even who would be filing. So with that, we can now go through what makes up the text or part of the documents. And as pointed out, we've increased, current year budget if you recall, last year this time, we were making efforts to try to reduce our reliance on the use of fund balance, and we were able to reduce what we had been budgeting of $3 million in fund balance down to 1.7, right at 1.8. Because of where we are today, we have proposed in next year to take that back to $3 million. So that reflects an increase of 1.2 in fund balance, use of fund balance. So we're at 3 million, total of 3 million use of fund balance in the 19-20 budget. Okay. Then the enhanced business license enforcements, as we've discussed, that doesn't require any ordinance changes, but would require help use of a auditing firm to assist us with some things, would be we're forecasting about a $2 million revenue from that effort. As stated, the business license nonprofit fee is not determined. Then the public safety fee would be 2.5. Of course, that's based on a full year worth of collection at $5, which I know we've talked today about different rate tiers, rate structures based on entity type, and then also different rates. So those two efforts with the revenue adjustments gave us $3.2 million additional in revenue. Does that, any questions about the revenues that we're talking through? Okay. Then next will be the expenditure reductions that we've made in terms of reducing departments' budgets. If you want to go through those in detail. Starting with that's the Budget and Program Management Office. It's time for a new citizen survey, so we've opted to postpone that citizen survey. Public Relations had requested an increase
We
to.
not used a lot of the feedback we got from the Columbia Compass. There's a lot of information in
It is a
there.
lot of information, which would help in that sense, but you're correct. Public Relations had added in some additional requests for some things that had been asked for them regarding council communications, some website upgrades, a couple of different efforts. So they had asked for about $50,000 in increases, so we scaled them back by about $25,000.
Just a question on the website upgrades. Have we addressed all of the ADA concerns that folks have raised with us?
Office of Business Opportunities had requested funds. I know they've talked a couple of times about it's time to redo or renew the disparity study. The facade, which is no longer called the facade, is actually now called the Commercial Retention and Redevelopment Program. Proposal of a microloan and a DBE capacity study. We've scaled back some of those. This isn't the total reduction. There is still funds added to their budget for some additional projects within the Commercial Retention and Redevelopment Program. And of course, sustaining their existing programs for small business outreach, managing in the MBWE program.
Just thinking of options, and I don't know what the amount that they were requesting for the disparity study, and I don't even know if there's still a desire or willingness on the county's part, but a few years ago, there was a meeting where it came up as to whether or not we did a joint one and it would cost less. And with the university. Yeah, so, I mean, that might be something just to think about, and then maybe even if the university's part of it, maybe the university pay the bulk of it.
Or conduct it. Community Development, they've asked for a van for some additional staffing they have for DR. We've actually shifted that van to our capital lease program, which at this point is still reflected in the budget for $8 million. Planning and Development Services, these were increases that they had requested for, in part for some of the Envision Columbia. Corridor plan, some efforts for corridor planning, BPAC traffic study. The BPAC, there are still BPAC related activities, it's just the traffic study is being deferred. Annexation election, those are small dollar amounts. Some of these may be able to be picked up within their existing budgets, but streamlined design guidelines. As mentioned, they do still have funding for BPAC, and then retained funding, about $66,000 that was needed for the complete count and census.
I'm sorry. Should there be a comma between annexation and election, or what?
No, it's when a community elects for
that
annexation.
process that we-
Yes,
okay.
yes. Sorry, it's not more clear. And then there's a grant match for historic resources that's actually retained within their budget as well.
If we eliminate the annexation election, we may be eliminating a chance to get our population up for our next decade.
And I'm not saying that they would completely eliminate it. I think these were some additional increases, some things that may be able, it's not a very expensive process. So there were some funds added that they'd be able to retain, so. Municipal Court had requested 4 new positions, so this would allow them to retain 2 of their new requested, and then we also reduced 1 of their 2 requested vehicles. Police Department, security camera upgrades, annual shot spotter, and other technology and equipment upgrades. That's the 1.9 that we suggested we would shift over to the public safety fee. Coming through, these were the competitiveness and operating equipment that was presented to you at the last council meeting. The 2.8, we would look at funding from when we were able to adopt or generate the revenues from the nonprofit fees. Same is true with the commercial code enforcement. The code enforcement is not just for staff, it's also for staff, for operating costs, and some costs for commercial demolitions. So that would not be the, just staff cost, of course. But that would be for, there were 6 code enforcement officers proposed. There's actually 2 that the police department's already added in the current year, so this would help fund their full 4 new additional ones, plus return the 2 positions that were reassigned for code enforcement. Emergency management had requested a mobile command trailer, some bollards, and then a surveillance tower. The next item is to complete the build-out. We would also look at the public safety fee to help complete the build-out of the emergency operations center in the new location. Fire department requested a CSO position, as community safety officer, for their headquarters, and then 2 additional deputy fire marshals. We would look at they've asked for, one of their top funding priorities is for a second turnout or bunker gear for their firefighters. We look at also with public safety fees. Parks and Recreation reduced 4 park rangers for Bull Street. Bull Street's mentioned, but it's also reflected that they would be utilized for some of the greenway activities as well.
They should create their own HOA.
Funding for various maintenance and repair projects, equipment. There's a number of items that they've asked for that they are not capital items, so they would be reflected in their operating budget. But then again, as pointed out, we have not proposed any funding at this point for our annual or any requested capital improvement programs as a part of the general fund, which would include things like our park upgrades or park projects that are capital. Public Works had requested 2 positions for construction administrators. We've actually scaled that back to 1, and then we've also proposed some funding for some reductions for vacancy savings. IT had asked for an additional system administrator for 911 services and the growth in some of the programs that 911 is being asked to do with regards to special call areas or call desks. So those totaled about $5.6 million in reductions in new request. As pointing out, some things were retained, maybe not fully, but then of course the budget at this point does reflect continuation of existing programs. Moving on to non-departmental, the capital replacement lease. This would be, right now what's reflected in the budget would be what was requested in the budget would be a full year of the cost, so we scaled it back in terms of when we would actually issue it. Part of the reason why we budget for a full year is so that the hit next year when it is back in the budget, it's not as much of a hit, but we've had to do this in prior years as well. So that's why you see on the budget for the capital lease, as we've shifted to the capital lease program for our vehicle replacement and technology upgrades, that's where their funding is from. We've already explained the cost of living and merit adjustments, affordable housing, and capital request. So those reductions, it's a little over $7 million in reductions plus an additional $3 million. That's brought us to a $3.3 million shortfall that we're still considering.
So let me be clear. The $3.3 million shortfall includes the increase in the fund balance and the enhanced business license. That's already been added at that.
Yes, ma'am.
So even when we were talking about the funding options, the enhanced business license, the $2 million, that's already been done. So that's not
On top.
an option.
Yeah, we included that.
So just when we did our options, we really need to take that out because we've already done that. So that wouldn't give us any additional money.
Yeah, but the 2.5 would,
Why?
the second
The
column.
$5.
Yeah, and that would, but we would still have the 3.3 deficit. But it would give you those items that were on those different lines.
So if you were funding everything, you'd add the 5.6 million and the 1.7 million together to come up with 7.3. You need $7.3 million.
To fund the department, to fund the budget at full
To cover
request.
these.
Yes.
We need $10 million. Reality is what we need.
Would you like for me to tell you where I would suggest getting it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Jamie's here.
I would suggest that we reinstitute the water transfer. It takes into consideration that 75% of the water fees are paid from people outside the city limits. It is included in everybody's nonprofit, for-profit homes. Everybody pays the water bill. We could do it without having any detrimental effect on the water and sewer fund. It can be done by our legal team by just adding a line to the budget. You can study this thing from now till the cows come home, and you're not gonna find a legal way to do what you want to do to specifically target the parcels that are not paying. We are going through a futile exercise if we expect our staff to come up with a miracle that no other staff in the state of South Carolina has been able to do.
Howard, I appreciate your thing. I'll be glad to, suggest we put it on the agenda and we vote for it publicly. I'm not voting for a water and sewer thing because it doesn't solve an issue. You're still paying, it is not generating enough money that you can afford when we're going out for bonding, going for increases to then pay for the things, and still, it doesn't hit the non-tax paying entities at any level like what property tax, both commercial and residential, are paying. So, I respect that you're willing to move it forward. I'm glad for you to put it on the agenda. I won't be voting for it because until we've gone after the other entities that are using the general services, because this isn't just water and sewer, this is general, I don't think it's fair. I think if this was on the back end and we were still short, we'd be having a whole different discussion.
My point is, you're not gonna find that.
But
silver
I
bullet.
disagree with you, Howard. I disagree with you because we haven't tried. And there is a solution. No, there is a solution, and the legislators gave us the gateway. And if you talk to people that are accountants and CPAs who study the tax law and understand what other people do, they have a lot of knowledge. It's amazing when you sit down with them what they can say. And I think until you can disprove that, I don't think this is the only solution.
If we can, because we've got some other things we need to discuss too, and we're almost at 4:00. I know that the next one is the nonprofits. Let's finish the whole presentation, and then we can have the debate that everybody wants to have and see what gets moved forward.
Yes, ma'am. So the nonprofit business license fee, this is separate and apart. This is from some discussions we had previously. So just some background, about 10,000 business licenses issued in 2018. Of those, right at about 6,000 or 5,900 are in-city businesses, and then there's about 3,800 out-of-city businesses that are issued. That's, of course, the ones that we know of and that are, that have filed. Of
How
those,
much does that generate,
I don't have an amount by those categories, I just know
just in general?
total revenues from business licenses, 42 million.
Okay, and so based on that, what kind of percentage of that, on average?
That's licenses and permits, so yeah.
Is
so there's-
based on gross resale? Is there an
And based on
average?
what, would you think, gross?
Gross receipts,
10
10 to 12%?
No. Of that 40 million, it's gonna be really rough, so probably 13 million is the franchise fee, probably the other 12 million is the insurance. There's some others that come in there, so purely just from the business license, if that's what you're asking, for our
So
businesses
out of the
out
42, we
there,
got
they're paying
13.
about 10 to 12 million of it.
So,
Is that what you're asking?
yeah, I'm trying to get down to the nuts and
And we
bolts.
can actually break out exactly what last year's was, to total that up. I'll add it to
I think it's important as we talk forward, on the option, that we understand really what the net number is and what that it could increase, because by changing the fundamental process, we may see other funding. But you gotta break it down, cause 42 million is not just really business license. Franchise fee is.
She said and permit.
Franchise
Yeah.
fee,
But that's what I'm saying,
telecommunications,
so we gotta get
insurance.
down to the net. as we
Building
discussed.
permits is also part of the building permits aren't in those numbers there, but that's part of the 42 million, but they're small, it's 2 million.
It'd be good to see, do we have an indication of where we are this year versus last year on those categories?
So in business license right now, we're about $300,000.
And what about permits? Can we get that? I think it'd be good to compare too, because that might play into our overall discussion as well. Thank you.
So nonprofit options, part of what we've talked about is whether it's going out for like a letter of agreement for services, which we've discussed possibly with the hospitals or the university.
Have we been able to determine what the Greenville system was paying, just so we have an idea?
There's 4 entities that pay, and they collect about 1 million total.
Greenville or Greenwood?
Greenwood.
Greenville.
Greenwood.
Greenwood. Okay, so I heard.
Greenville
Wasn't
also
Greenville
has
play, Greenville was.
545, I think.
I'm just asking because since it's now Prisma, yeah, Greenville, yeah. My understanding is that they were paying
I think it's 545,000.
540. And what's that based on?
It was an agreement to, they would supplement the city by 545. I don't know if it's based on anything other than that's the
Just an
amount of money
agreement.
they agreed on.
They ain't gonna do us no good.
That's better than we get.
And I'm not sure, I think on that, I feel like there was a lawsuit, and it has to do, because initially they were either city or county owned at the hospital there. And there's something else that occurred, and I can't recall the facts on
It
it.
was-
We'll have to take a look.
It was an agreement.
And then it turned into an agreement.
Yeah.
Sort of.
They left too much on the table at $500,000.
No, because some of it is capital outlay.
So other topics that have been discussed or has been requested or for consideration is a payment in lieu of tax, possibly with higher ed, hospital, medical services. It's also been discussions about a bid on the higher education campus and
That
areas.
would be based on the properties within the bid area.
I believe that's what the expectation would be. And of course, the business license would be to charge a fee to business type activities that currently receive a no-fee business license, or in addition to that, charging a fee to businesses that are in nonprofit that don't issue a business license.
And it's come up a couple times, so I did verify. Brooklyn does pay a business license fee to West Columbia based on gross sales.
Hospitality tax too? I think that.
I don't know if they collect
I
hospitality.
didn't ask on hospitality tax, I just.
I don't think they do
asked.
hospitality.
Does West Columbia has hospitality tax?
I don't know.
No, they didn't pass.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
do.
they do,
Yeah, they
they do.
That's how they're paying for that parking and all that they're building.
Well, is Brooklyn paying hospitality tax?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would assume they
Okay.
would,
Yeah.
yeah.
They're
Yes, I
paying,
understand, and they're
we've
paying
got a
in
follow-up
every
meeting.
category that would
Right.
be applicable. And we can double check, I mean, there's some of our
Hey,
churches that are paying, voluntarily doing it. I think that's the point, is there's inconsistencies
that's
there.
the key. The key is we use those examples to make everybody else pay.
I think First Baptist Cafe, they pay.
business license, yeah.
And I shared this with Mr. Rickman and Ms. Wilson earlier, just I know the concerns that other folks have raised, and I know the mayor's not here. But, I was actually on the gospel station yesterday, and I talked about this as an option, and the few callers who came in,
Got a mayor pro tem.
What did I
A
say?
couple, people agreed. I mean, they didn't feel like, that was unreasonable to charge for the business
That there.
part of it, not, not the sanctuaries, not that kind of thing, but, and so, just so we know that there probably is, as we talked about, once we lay out it, I think even some of the churches would recognize that there's a fair share that they should be paying.
So this conversation obviously will be continued, and so as the revised ordinance changes will come before council. So nothing that is reflected in the budget with regards to revenues here, as we do get through the process and determine a revenue amount we can collect, then we can, of course, associate expenses with that.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other discussions about general fund before I move on to our special revenues?
Thank you all for, that's some tough discussions, but thank you all. And I do think we've made a lot more progress this year as a staff, even trying to understand it, and we've got some work to do.
And we appreciate it. I mean, and I think we just gotta make some hard decisions, and there is no easy path, but we have to forge forward. We just need to realize that there are options, and the goal is to create some level playing fields for everybody and fully invested, because everybody's enjoying the spoils of the city.
Okay, all right, moving on. Hospitality tax. So hospitality tax, we have proposed next year to remain flat. We're looking at 12.1 million, which is no change from the current year in terms of the base budget. Right now, revenues are not keeping up with what we've projected for this year. We are hopeful thinking between now and June 30th. Of course, if there are,
We don't have like revenues from NCAA and that kind of stuff in yet, do we? We do?
yes.
I think part of it is, too, is, yeah, we've had, for every new restaurant, we've had 2 closed, so we've had some turnovers going on a lot lately, and, just looking at relatively, I think we're seeing a lot of things down. I think we'll see that our building permits are down by probably, I'm guessing, $200,000-300,000 this year. I think we're seeing business license stuff down. I mean, there's a general, and it goes back to the long story I've been preaching about, is that, when everybody's growing around us, we gotta figure out why we're not. Taxes, and obviously at some point we gotta have a discussion with the school district as well, because they're the bulk of it.
Yeah, and I think that they're willing, I've tried to kind of let them know where we are, because they, and Ms. Wilson, probably the county too, we need to let, like, entities know, like, what we're thinking about for water increase and others, because they're in budget now as well. My understanding is they did not budget an increase in water, but now they are, based on what I've told them, but I think we need to, at least out of respect, make sure that they know, but I think we can have those conversations, and there's probably a willingness. The reality for them is very similar to us, is that, with Act 388 and other things, they're not, their growth is limited as well. And I will say, I forgot to bring it, I did see the comment you made about the money going into the classroom. I think the 82% goes in the classroom for Richland 1. I haven't gotten Richland 2 yet. But,
All the new bonding's not, though.
well, that's different than the general fund budget.
But
It's not
that
general.
was my point in the context of the conversation is that, that $500 million in Richland 2 is gonna have a really adverse effect on the property owners, especially the folks who are in Richland 2 in the city, because their millage rate is gonna be close to 700 plus mills, which is gonna affect affordability, it's gonna affect resale, it's gonna affect businesses. I mean, so, these are I mean, I think we have to keep an eye on it, and, we're, unfortunately, we're 200-300 mills different in education costs between the upstate and the low country, and we need to,
Which is the conversation that we had, that we are unique, and it's not just to us, to the city, it's for the county and the school districts as well. And so when we have those conversations with our legislative delegation and others, that needs to be part of the conversations.
I think you're exactly right.
So, and Richland One, honestly, they, like us, we went to body cameras for the state mandated. Is, Richland One, they've actually, given increases to their teachers and others before, the state decides. So, that hurts their budget, and then when something happens statewide, it doesn't take an effect, but we've already tried to put those things in our budget. So we need to have those conversations sooner rather than later.
I agree.
So we've talked about the two different types of audits that we're gonna do. One of the other additional studies we wanna do this year is take a look at the effects of Act 388. How much has been capped at the 15%? How much, if everything wasn't capped, would we truly be paying, and what's been the effect on us, the county and the school district?
With all the assessments and everything, if they took it away now, nobody could afford to pay their taxes.
Well, now, one thought on that would be, though, you would then roll everything back.
You really think that's gonna happen?
No, I don't. I'm just telling you from, if there's a plan to be put out, that's how you look at it.
They did it in 1980 when the Chamber of Commerce sued them, and they had to equalize the assessments all over the state. And it worked fine for about 10 years, and then they started tinkering with it.
Well, that's a whole nother discussion when they got close to, what, $500 million of reoccurring money coming in over there in surplus, and, they ought to be refunding it, not spending it.
So with regards to hospitality tax, as we continue to look, we do want to make sure, so the budget, what was provided to you shows both the approved budget and the amended budget, so that you can see there were allocations made in the current year from fund balance. We're not projecting any fund balance at this point. So as you talk with folks, or as folks are listening or are expecting, current allocations based on the amended budget is not the same as what we're basing as in terms of what the base budget is.
Can you
proposed
read
at.
the line, give us the breakdown of the 12 million?
Yeah, so the 12 million, there is, what we're showing here currently reflects at what's in the budget now. I do want to point out that the line item agencies there are several of the line item agencies, not all, have requested increases. Those amounts were reflected in your budget memo. They are not reflected in the budget currently. We just want to make sure that's clear. Of course, what actually happens here is based on what council directs us to do within the budget. So this is just reflecting and keeping flat pending any other additional allocations or instructions from city council. So what makes up the budget, the $12.1 million budget, $2.1 million is for the committee. They're meeting now. That's maintaining at current year levels of allocation.
2.1?
2.1.
2.4, right?
2.4, that reflects actuals. That's from some prior years, and that makes up some funding that may have been coming from fund balance or some other fund balance allocations. And then 2, if there was a group in the committee that also got funding from city council, it may not be reflected. We're trying to reflect those differently now.
And that's included in your pie chart under allocations, correct?
Correct. So hospitality allocations reflect all the external allocations, so 45%.
Which is 5.4 million roughly. So what's included in that 45? 2.1
So
goes to
2.1 has,
committee.
right, and then
So
2.7 is for council line item agencies, which also includes some special projects of those line item agencies.
Okay.
And then the council allocations, what we've reflected there are those things that have been committed to in prior years. Council's
So-
made several commitments that are multi-year commitments.
Okay, so 2.7, 2.1, okay, so that leaves about
And then
600 grand.
609,000. Yep.
And where does that go?
So right now, there is, reflected in the budget as it is today, laying flat, there's about 42,000 that's not allocated.
Okay,
100,000 for continuation of the Gateway to the Army, which is the 1920 will be the final year of that commitment,
And how much is that per year?
100,000
So this was the 1920.
is the final year.
this
Yes.
is it.
That was a 3-year commitment?
It was a 3-year commitment. Gateways to the Army.
Fort Jackson. They're actually,
Is that the?
Centennial Park.
This is.
that is this week.
Actually, that was a 4 or 5 year, it was a
It's
4 or
only
5.
partially it's open, or something, they said they were still fundraising.
Right, yeah, I saw them advertising today on
So
WS.
that is what that's going, because that crossed my mind this morning.
It is.
Yeah, I saw something on the news, so I guess they're having the opening or something.
Yeah.
I think that may have been actually a 3 or 4 year, Jeff's
It was
raising
a
his hand.
3-year commitment, with $100 a year.
Right. Also on here, it reflects, there was a future commitment for Congaree Vista of 115. And again, these are council allocations, these are maybe over and above what the committee would be considering.
Under the, transfer to debt service, 24%, 2.9, what does that go to?
2.9 goes to the 2 hospitality tax bonds.
Which are,
One is for the multipurpose venue, and one was for the original bond that was issued when we first established hospitality tax in 2003.
but do we know what those balances are and where the payoffs are? Okay.
I can get that to you.
No, I just wondering where the
So,
original, when it's
yeah, so-
coming down. I mean, it's been there for quite a while.
Right, so the 2000, I think it was 2003 was the first bond, and then
Okay.
we refinanced that
Refinanced
in
it.
2012.
12, 13?
But I think it pays off in 2023.
Yeah, I
I think it's
didn't
the
bring the whole
year after
schedule.
the convention center bond.
Okay.
So it's 2023. So what we did is when we issued for the venue, we tried to keep a level payments all the way across. So when I estimate around 2.6 million, we're paying both. So when the one bond pays off in 2023, then the payments on the venue accelerate. So we'll still be at roughly 2.6 to
It doesn't
2.7
change.
million.
It's
So that's
2.9.
just going to stay. And also included in there is roughly 150. Will that be in there?
Yes, for the,
H-tax
payoff.
bond for the interest for, that's on tonight's, that's the second reading.
That's 150?
150. Actually, I've gotten some numbers, so it'll actually end up being, we put 150 since our estimate. It's really going to be, I don't know if all closing costs are included, but I think it's going to be closer to about 130. But I just got that email about
And that's
an hour
not
ago.
counting whatever we decide to do with Finley Park.
That's correct. So, but that wouldn't be in this budget. If if what we do with Finley comes up during the year, then that would be a new vote to have the budget to adjust.
And then the general fund breakdown?
general fund breakdown is 3.7 million, and that is reflected for cost of services provided by the general fund that would be qualified or could be considered for hospitality tax funding.
So
That number's been, remained for several years now.
Mostly police, public works.
55%
Public Works,
of
Parks and
that
Recreation.
goes back.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Did you want me to finish going through the list of allocations from council?
Which ones are rolling off? You got 100,000 more on the Centennial Park, but isn't the Nickelodeon, this over? this year?
Nickelodeon, this is, the current year is the last year for the Nickelodeons, 110.
And how much is that?
110. But you've picked up Congaree Vista, you've picked up 5 points.
What was the 5 points?
You added 125 for 5 points for next year at the last council meeting.
And let me add, when we talk about these that are falling off, I would highly encourage to think about what we're going to do in Finley Park over the next couple of years. So we've talked about growth helping to pay for that, but the last 18 months, growth hasn't been spectacular. So anything that's paying off as well, we need to keep that as a consideration to assisting with Finley Park, along with maybe more modest growth than initially anticipated.
Well, we're gonna, whatever we do, we gotta have maintenance money. So, I mean, there's no
Let's
reason to
include
do
maintenance money,
anything
too.
until we have maintenance money. You need to institute a HOA at Bull Street, Howard, your next commission meeting.
So we have-
Unfortunately, we met yesterday, and it wasn't on our agenda.
I think you ought to put it on there.
So we've retained the transfer to the general fund at 3.7. Okay. Again, those allocations are subject to city council's considerations. We just want to make sure you understand about, in terms of what budget there is to work with. There are some items that council will still need to take up in consideration. Accommodations tax is looking a little rosier. We do see some continued growth in those revenues. We're proposing a $2.6 million budget, which is an increase of about $90,000, or about 3.5% over current year. State law, of course, determines how much you can, where and what you allocate accommodations tax for. City Council has gone further and designated that the Experience Columbia CVB gets 85% of of those funds, and then 15% goes to Lake Murray. Combined, those are 95% of the hospitality tax budget, less the $25,000 that is directly transferred to the general fund per state law. The other 5% is used for general purposes, or in other words, you could be used like general fund. We have funded usually some community promotion activities out of there. That's also where we are currently funding Together We Can Read and One Columbia.
Where is One Columbia regularly budgeted? Because 5%.
It's split between general, so it's split, their allocation is split between hospitality tax and the general purpose accommodations tax allocation.
The general purpose is the ones that we were told weren't eligible for hospitality, and then the balance is paid out of hospitality.
Something we probably need to get a review on.
I'm not sure we've seen a recent budget, though.
They are one of the items that I believe has requested an increase in next year in terms of line items from the line item agencies out of hospitality tax.
Did they ever fix the laser project? That was
Actually, they're still showing at what, 83.8.
$120,000?
I don't think so.
I don't know if they've requested an increase above that 83.8 that's in the hospitality tax. So
We probably need to put them in the discussion category along with Ingenuity and everybody else.
Any questions about accommodations tax? All right, the final item is to talk about our budget calendar and sort of assess where we are today, and then what we're going to be doing going forward with advertising the budget along with the dates. We do appreciate City Council accommodating an additional meeting in June for the budget public hearing and first reading, so that we could accommodate additional discussions today before we advertise the budget. We will advertise the budget tomorrow for June 11th. What will be advertised will be the amount of revenues that we have projected. That means the expenditures that we have allocated, that we've shown so far, will have to be in balance with what we have in terms of revenues, so that $3.3 million shortfall. At this point, we don't have any other projections or estimates or changes to what we've projected.
Advertise it without being balanced.
You can advertise it because we'll be in balance by the public hearing, first reading.
I mean, are you comfortable doing that, or you want to push everything a week until we get it balanced?
We'll get it balanced.
And if we have
Anything,
changes down the
there's a-
road, we
there's-
can always do a budget amendment.
And if anything, there's an extra Tuesday.
There is an extra Tuesday in June.
So let's, if y'all are okay with it, I think we can stick to this and push. But if anything, we would talk on the 4th about pushing, adding an extra Tuesday, but I don't think it'll be necessary.
I will just say that, yeah, the 25th is my NLC leadership meeting, so I'll be out of town.
I don't think it'll be necessary.
June 11th is the short meeting for just a reading.
Yes.
6 o'clock.
So is the 4th.
No, the June 4th is just continued budget
Oh,
discussions.
11th is a short.
I'm not here the 4th.
So June 11th will be public hearing and first reading, and the only thing is at this point planned on the agenda would be this topic.
The 11th you should be balanced.
Oh, absolutely, yes, sir.
Yes, most definitely.
We will be advertising for both the general fund budget along with the water and sewer proposed rates. What I'm hearing is we're not proceeding with advertising the public hearing tomorrow for the public safety fees? Or are we advertising as we are, or not at all, or just looking for?
I don't believe that $5, I think we're hurting our chances on getting to the place we need to be by selling it short. Doesn't mean we can't add it. We've got time. We can add it the day of the public hearing if we needed to. Yeah, you can, because we can have we can have a third meeting in June. We have plenty of weeks. The month doesn't end on the 18th.
That's the additional date that we're,
That's fine, I mean, that's fine.
What can we do, just balance it and be shortfall and then amend the budget in a couple of months until we get the audit and everything else that we're looking for to increase the revenue?
we would,
I
because.
mean, I guess what you could do is you could advertise it. We don't have to do it.
Well, that's what I was saying, I mean, what's the harm in advertising it for discussion's sake?
I just, when you put a dollar amount on it, the reality is that, you know, how do you go to where we need to be if that becomes the user fee that you put together ultimately? That's just my question. I mean, that's, you know, it's a perception question, but, you know, I don't know.
I think part of that is that we would have to advertise the actual fee in itself. So, but yes, we would amend the budget, even if we were to postpone it, we would have to amend the budget to reflect those costs.
Because now, let's keep in mind, this
Revenue and
year, which is rare, we will have to do an amendment anyhow in August because of the rollback for reassessment. In years past, we were very good at estimating that. We didn't end up having to do one because we had already estimated the rollback. Due to the timing of getting the information from the county on assessments, we can't possibly have it before June's over. So we're still going to have to come back to do that. So that could be a time that we could do an amendment as well.
So why can't we do the same thing and do the $5 public service fee whenever we amend the budget back in August, I mean, not back, but in August or September?
Can you just lose those months of collection? But that's fine.
We're just mostly looking to make sure we're all on the same page with regards
Yeah,
to
if you wanna do it
what-
all.
what
I mean,
the
this is
expectations are with
more
our
of a-
timeframe.
We're throwing out all the,
I'm like Daniel, we really got the momentum now, let's just get all the information we need and then come up with a decision. I mean, I'm 100% with that. I think before we start just bailing ourselves out of it the easy way, just do the $5 fee.
my personal thought is you're gonna need all of these options ultimately. But I hear what you're saying, I'm not saying, you know, this is putting it all on the table.
Right.
I don't want to sell ourselves short on that fee at this point. I mean, I think we need to have some further discussion.
And I think $2.5 million is not gonna bail us out every year. It's just something that we need to figure out and solve the problem now.
But it pays for shot spotter
But
and
it's-
cameras, and I
that's
think
right.
that in the scheme of things, I hear what Daniel's saying, it won't get us where we need to be. So we've gotta do those other things, but if that's something we know that we can do, that it will clearly pay for some of the needs of CPD and fire department, I guess, if that's some of the things in your list, but why not put it out there and say, this is what we're discussing, this is a fee, and this is specifically what it paid for, and we list it out, shot spotter, cameras, whatever it is, so that
But
people.
Tamika, what if we have to use that in conjunction as a user fee, which has been recommended for public safety, and you've already advertised $5, but the reality is what we're doing is not $5. It's a fee that's much larger based on, it could be property, it could be business, it could be this or that, and do you then have handcuffed yourself to that number? Because it's hard to go from $5 to
We can.
Yeah.
We-
2,500
Yeah,
or
we
whatever
can.
the number
And
is.
I don't disagree with that, that's why I asked
When you did it on
Ms. Wilson, and
valuation
so
of
we wouldn't have that number today, but that's why I asked is.
What I'm
look, you
wondering,
know, what if we
you
looked
know,
at
I think that's a good point.
higher fee? I mean, I think we have to do a fee specifically, I mean, we've got a lot of needs, parks and others, but I think we certainly have to address the law enforcement need.
Yeah, and I just hate to throw out a number and a fee till we've kind of nailed down some things, and I think we, you know.
I think we're approaching it as two separate things.
Well, that's the
I mean,
only
we
problem is, to
wouldn't-
me, let's say that we imposed a user fee, and it's focused on public safety, which is not just fire and police, but also public works. But yet if you're advertising that, then you can't go back and do the additional fee.
I think what he's saying is, for the perception to the public is handling it all at the same time, is that what you're saying?
The difference with the third column is that's the column that's based off the ordinance change and the audit, and it would impact non-taxable entities, and it would not impact every No, it is two totally different things.
I don't know
It's
if I
like
agree.
one, I'm not,
I don't know if I agree with
that-
your outlook on it.
I'm not saying that one goes away. If we do alternate one now, alternate one will remain unless y'all pull it back, because you then see that alternate two. My take on this at this point with where we are is because I don't necessarily think right now alternate two is gonna generate what we're hoping it will. Just me personally. So I was suggesting that we go ahead and implement an alternate one and push really hard to get to alternate two, and it's not challenged and all those things, and you add that on top of alternate one.
Well,
It
here
was-
you even
but
have-
it's just, it's whatever, it's the will of the council. I don't think that there's a silver bullet.
Well, here with alternate one, if you still do the $5 per parcel, you're still about 600,000 short.
We're still 3.3 short.
Short.
Okay, so I was taking the 2.5 off of the 3.3.
No.
So,
It's seven something, so they gave you the 3 point, yeah.
It's just that it's adding on. These two columns keep adding on top of each other.
right.
So
But I was saying if you did the two, because I know you've got the other budget. I'm not talking about the general budget. I'm saying if we did the 2.5 for public safety fee, that $5, 2.5.
it would
that would
get you
pay
those
for-
things underneath it.
Right, so that's what I was looking at. Okay.
Those things should add
add
up
up.
to 2.5, Missy.
I'm looking
The
at
police line and the EMT.
1.9.
Those things total, those total 3.1 for now,
Right,
so
that's
it would
what
be
I'm
better.
saying.
Oh,
3.1. So, yeah.
we would only do 2.5 worth.
Well, why not do a dollar fee?
Oh,
Something
because
that
I
makes it
didn't, yeah, we didn't.
So, if you're saying this is.
I agree with you,
what
but,
you need.
right, I understand. So that's what you were thinking, Mr.
Yeah.
Rickman was referring to, is that we were locking ourselves into a lower fee than what we ought to do. Hey, if y'all
And-
want to do a $10 fee.
Well, I still have heartburn that we're asking the same people who are already paying for it to pay for it
Right, I
again.
thought that was the bigger.
That's for me is the biggest
philosophical
thing. But at the same time, when's the last time that we can advertise to do it?
So,
I
let's
just
look
don't
at it
wanna
this way.
make a
And let-
decision right now because I think we're
You
gonna.
don't want to rush into it.
And let me say this too, you don't have-
into $5.
That's why I'm
Oh,
saying,
okay.
we can wait and amend the budget in August after we get the data that we needed, and that way we'll determine where, if we're gonna do a public safety fee, we'll just do it then and amend the budget. And, I know you're gonna lose a couple of months of revenue, but.
There's no
it's
more
still-
data that we'll get that would apply to that.
No, we're talking about the,
Public safety,
the not tax
the
exempt.
business, right.
We won't get that till closer to
Yeah, I was
January.
gonna say, you're losing a window of a public safety fee for
I'm
something
just
you
worried
know.
about
But
using
I hear what Daniel's saying.
Yeah,
I
I
agree.
understand what you're saying.
I agree with Daniel.
And it's
saying.
not just
I'm
one
not
year,
sure
though.
what Mo is proposing, if it gets us, it's just pushing it down the thing, and we're not really getting the right information. But I understand what Daniel's saying, if maybe between now and the next meeting, we can look at these numbers a little bit more and get a little bit more clear on if we were able to give a fee, and are you still talking about like some kind of rebate to property owners, 4% to property owners? Some kind of,
That's
so
doable.
what would the fee need to be per parcel in order to give
And-
the 4% owners some kind of rebate on it, but still get the money that we need?
And I think it's something we can talk about too with council when we're, no, there's an avenue and we need to talk about it and there's.
Yeah.
But
And
I
then
think-
too, I think fairness, you don't have the ordinance actually in front of you that we would be advertising, and so I think there's probably a desire to see that ordinance
So
before
we'll look in June, but you won't be here. But we'll talk about it before you.
I'm in a conference that week, but I can call in at a certain point if we need to. But we can have further discussion yet, because we still need to talk about a couple legal issues around that. But I think there is an avenue that's been put together to the legislature, which is is set up exactly the same way, and so that eliminates the override. But I can tell you if you put it
I
on
can't
water.
wait to see that avenue.
So I know we have had a
I've
great
had 4
discussion.
professionals pointed
We
out,
still-
I think they know what
We
they're
still
talking
have a
about.
lot of executive session items, and I know that some of the executive session items pertain to stuff for that. So are we at a good place to?
You don't want to do water and sewer because Texas just got sued over it.
Mr. Rickman.
Tripling the churches.
Texas.
Just have, we got,
I think so. Mr.
You're
Fedora
gonna
was
be-
proposing y'all meet on the second versus,
The third.
I mean, the third versus.
I'm gone.
You're not
He's gone the whole week,
The
whole
he's at a
week.
conference, so he's saying he can call it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you need to call it. On the 14th versus.
Well, and I wouldn't want us
Are we allowed to vote?
to be too
No.
restrictive on our schedule
Y'all would be
because,
voting on the 4th anyway.
right.
Oh, I thought you were voting on it's just a public meeting. Gotcha.
The regular
the
public
board
hearing
is
and
allowed.
first reading,
We will be given first reading, but what
June
what we're
11th.
talking about, Daniel is making a decision.
You're talking about the 4th, right? That you.
Okay, so,
No, they're 11.
I'm sorry, okay.
Me too, my bad.
okay, so are we ready to go in executive session?
Well, Mr. Ando made it, but, I mean, it is time to go in executive session, but I know he.
Is yours a time sensitive thing?
John, about how long is your presentation? Okay.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Thank you, Missy.
Put it in your jar for the wedding. I want to get some people who know the word yes in the room, not the no crowd.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for taking the time to chat with me. John Ando, Executive Director of the Comet. This is probably the first time we've done this before, but in compliance with state law as a regional transportation authority, we need each of our member governments to approve our proposed operating and capital budget. And this is section 582570 of chapter 25 of the Regional Transportation Authority, so law. So going forward, every fiscal year will come before each of our member agencies to ask for approval of our operating budget before our board can adopt an operating and capital budget. And as you're aware, we're the Central Midlands Regional Transit Authority. We're a governmental agency that provides public transit services in Richland and Lexington counties. Member agencies include City of Columbia, City of Forest Acres, Richland County, Lexington County, and then we also have delegation members from the Richland County delegation that serves as our voting board. And then we also have jurisdictions that financially contribute but do not vote from the cities of West Columbia, Casey, Town of Springsdale, and then Lexington County and the Lexington County delegation also appoint non-voting board members. Our brand is the Comet. We provide fixed route and paratransit services throughout Richland and Lexington counties on 34 routes with 2 reflex services and a van pool program that just recently started. We also have a subsidy program with Lyft and Uber. We're funding 10 bike share stations in the City of Columbia. And we transport about 2.8 million passenger trips a year on 81 buses. We run 7 days a week, 363 days a year. Our organization is 12 employees. Under myself, I have a Director of Finance, CFO, and Director of Administration and Operations, COO, a Director of Regulatory Compliance and Civil Rights Officer, and then a Grants and Regional Coordination Manager. A fairly lean organization. And then this is the voting structure of our board. We do contract out our transit operations to a company called Transdev. They're based out of Lombard, Illinois. They're a large lion's share of our overall operating budget. We pay approximately $15 million of our budget to them. And then our mission statement, vision statement, and core values is here. These were adopted by our board back in 2015 as part of the strategic plan process. Some future things we're trying to do with the Comet, we want to be more of a mobility manager. We're getting ready to study the transit system. It hasn't been studied since 2009. we're taking a different approach in studying the system. We're gonna look at it from a complete redesign basis. We're gonna determine if the current route system makes sense, and if it doesn't, look at how can we make the bus system more fast, fun, frequent, and friendly for our community. And that's where that short-range transit plan comes into play. We're getting aggressive to add more passenger amenities throughout the service area, more shelters, more benches, make it more comforting for our riders. And then for the next couple of years, we're going to be educating the community about the value of the Comet. We want to make sure that the bus system is making financial sense to the community and making sure that we're right-sizing the services to meet the needs of our service area. Because we are projecting that we will utilize our entire penny funding, $300,991,000 by 2029. So we have about 9 more years left. So we need to start determining a future strategy for funding the Comet beyond then. Our revenues, we're projecting to be a $29 million budget this year, about a 13% change. $23 million of that is our operating budget. $6 million of that is our capital budget.
So, in the operating, can you walk us through that?
Sure.
You got 15 million in contract, so what's covered in your contract?
So in our contracts, we have the TransDev, that's our lion's share. Professional services includes the legal services, marketing, public relations, accounting services.
Where is that?
Did you guys have a copy of our budget? That would be on page 11, where we show our detailed expenditures.
I don't think we got that.
Yeah, page 11 shows our detailed expenditures, which it also shows the
We have a
professional
copy of
services.
that.
It's attached.
She's gonna print it,
Okay.
we don't have it.
Oh, you don't have it, okay. So you're like wanting like the total cost of our professional services?
Well, I wanna know what each line item is, because, to understand, because right now, it looks like your proposed budget's $30 million, which is an increase of $3.4 million from previous year.
Correct.
I'm trying to understand what those expenses are.
So I can summarize briefly looking at the document that I have in front of me. Salaries is about $892,000. Marketing,
So, just so that is for the, for your 11 folks.
for my
correct?
11 folks, yes. Common admin. Marketing, we budgeted at $256,000, and that is about a 15% increase, so we can be more aggressive in promoting our services.
Okay.
And John, you've got the revenue, so I'm gonna have questions about the revenue, but can you, since you're talking about expenses now, can you go to wasn't it the next one?
See, there, the expenses isn't on,
Oh,
wasn't shown on,
there?
yeah.
Okay,
I thought, that's why I'm kind of just summarizing
okay.
while the document's being printed.
And the in-kind revenue you lose in this coming year, is that?
Yeah, so we, the in-kind revenue is based off of the City of Columbia providing the transit center and the Assembly Street bus shelter. But we've since learned that since those are federally funded, you can't use that as an in-kind. So we had to subtract that.
So while we're waiting on that, let me ask the questions I have about revenue. This looks like, so as far as passenger fare revenue, you're proposing an increase or projecting an increase of over 200,000. I'm just wondering, is that realistic? And then an advertising revenue of 32,000. I mean, it just seems like those increases are big. Where are you basing that change on?
We did a fare increase effective January. We haven't increased fares since 2007. So the revenues today are coming in higher than we anticipated, and our ridership continues to increase. So that's where we projected the increase in passenger fares. The advertising revenue, for about 3 years, we haven't advertised on the Comet. The board has adopted a new advertising policy, which allows us to start advertising on the interior, exterior of our buses, as well as our bus shelters.
John, is that for the bus to be wrapped, or?
Not necessarily wrapped, but we develop a design so that it can be incorporated into our existing brand without distracting from the brand and still generate some revenue. So we are getting aggressive with selling ads on those assets, which can help offset some of the revenues, other revenue streams that we receive.
And then the increase from Lexington County, is that, that's in their budget now?
That is in their budget. Last week, I did a presentation to the Lexington County Council on the same budget, and they, with that number, and they included that. Historically, Lexington County's figure was capped. I've started to talk with our contractual partners as well as the Lexington County about increasing their shares in accordance with CPI, since the TransDev contract increases with CPI. The board did adopt a service equity policy to ensure that whatever jurisdictions are paying into the common are getting the services that's appropriate with that jurisdiction, so that we don't have counties subsidizing other counties for services. And we actually have even gone as far as, when you'll see in the budget document, calculating route miles by jurisdiction and matching the revenues with that. And then we have interest income that is increased because we transferred a lot of our funds to the local government investment fund that is managed by the state, and we're getting a higher percent interest rate with the state than we were with Optus and Wells Fargo Bank. The Richland County penny, we're keeping flat. State mass transit from SCDOT is declining, and it's declining to all transit operators across the state. We recently received some hospitality tax funding from the city of Casey, and we're also pursuing funding from the city of West Columbia and the city of Columbia to support Soda Cap Connector.
John, just so my math is correct, remind me, the original 2019 budget fares is 2.45. That's at $1.50 a rider or $2 a rider?
That's at $1.50.
Okay, so that means there's about 4,400 riders
That's about
per
right.
day, average.
If you average it based off the 363, yes. Generally, it's
Make
higher
sure I
on
have the numbers
weekdays.
right.
Yeah. And then we've received CDBG funds from Richland County and Lexington County to support bus shelters, and we're starting a low-income pass program to sell bus passes at 50% off for those that meet the Department of Health and Housing poverty guidelines. And then federal revenues is increasing significantly. We're putting some federal funds into operations since we run less than 100 peak buses. And then we also have some capital projects that are utilizing the federal funds. And that's really the lion's share of why you get to that 13% increase, is because of the additional capital projects that we're doing, such as getting more aggressive with passenger shelters and continuing to improve our assets. And then miscellaneous income such as surplusing equipment, selling tokens, toy buses, and various items that we can generate revenue from. So
Just going back, I'm just trying to do some math and trying to understand all these numbers. So fringe benefit and salaries for your 11 folks is roughly $1.2 million.
that's about right, yes?
So that's an average salary of 109 for each one of your folks.
No, I wouldn't say, I wouldn't, no.
Well, I'm just dividing 11 into 1.2, and that's the number I get, so.
You're doing the 892,087 plus the
plus the
277,
yeah.
882? No, our average salaries are, the only person that's over 100,000 is myself.
Well, the math doesn't add up to that, John, so I guess we need to figure out. I mean, if you got 11 people,
Let me pull up the actual breakout.
and then I noticed the marketing, advertising, promotion, that's increased by 156. Can you tell us who, is that contracted? What does that include?
So the marketing includes basically all of our advertising and promotions and printed materials that we're going to, and promotional items that we're going to procure in order to promote the comment. So that includes like billboard ads, newspaper ads, television ads. Normally, as a standard, transit agencies should be budgeting 1% to 2% of their operating budget for marketing activities.
All All right, but I mean, that just, the one I'm reading is increased 156%, and that's marketing, but the printing underneath, that's a whole separate line item, that's another 85.
And the printing, so the marketing and the printing portion is for printing timetables and system maps.
Okay.
Whereas the marketing printing is like specialty flyers and promotional, like for instance, as we promote the Uber Lyft program and the Blue Bike program, that's gonna fall into the marketing budget. Our general timetables, our system maps, that falls under the printing budget. We also have the consultant, Flock and Rally, that's included also in the marketing, and they're going to be managing the marketing plan and its implementation.
You have reserved for service enhancements, which you didn't have before. What is that?
So that's the federal funds that we've added into the operational piece. Our goal of adding federal funds into operations is to start reducing the dependency of the penny and start storing penny revenues in a reserve account so that, one, it can help us extend out to 2029, and two, so that we have an emergency and an operating reserve. Historically, the Comet did not have a reserve account.
And I noticed, so you had $980,000 for professional contracted services this year, and that's reduced by 52%. What was the change there?
We went out to bid for a lot of those contracts that have not been procured in years. So by us going out to bid, drastically reduced the costs. And then as part of our recent reorganization, we are stopped utilizing consultants, and we've shifted those duties back to either TransDev or Comet staff. One thing I've learned for the past year is that there's a lot of duplication of effort going on. So that's one thing that we've stopped. To answer your question, I pulled up the detailed on the salaries. The average salary when I add up the 11, including temporary staff and interns, is about $68,622. And then on the fringe benefits, our lion's share, $138,809, is going to PIBA for the South Carolina retirement. Yeah. And then $68,245 is FICA and Medicare. $6,500 is unemployment. $1,200 is workers' compensation. $63,129 is health insurance for 11 employees, and $1,980 is for dental. And then there's also another line for $61,149 for health as well.
Madam Mayor Pro Tem,
Yes, sir.
this is going along further than the 5 minutes, and we've got a lot of stuff on our executive committee meeting. Can John be invited back at another meeting to finish this up?
Yeah, when does your board have to approve your budget, John? Can you come on June 4th?
June 4. I'm actually going to be out on June 4. Can I come to your following meeting?
Yeah, I didn't know what your time frame was for your board. You said we have to approve it before your board can approve it?
Yeah, our board's having a meeting on Wednesday, and then the next time they'll meet again will be the last Wednesday in June.
What about June 11th?
Okay, so June 11th.
Yep, I could do that. What time?
Miss,
6.
so with the 11th.
11.
It would be at the park at 6 o'clock.
Okay, 6 o'clock.
Unless you all wanted to come ahead of the budget public hearing.
I mean, we may have to, but for what he needs to do, we could do, because we've got to vote. We can't vote during the day, so. June 11th. June 11th at 6.
So
No,
John,
we're
this
just saying
goes,
time-wise, we need to
before your
execute
board
session, so.
Wednesday?
Go for my board Wednesday, yes, and the action will be conditional upon receiving approval from all of the member
Yeah, he
governments.
said we have to approve it.
We have some
Well,
questions.
they
You
wouldn't
have
have
some
been
questions?
they wouldn't have been able to do that during this.
Yeah, we can't, we don't vote in executive.
Is that process, you just had to present it, this is the same?
No, it's actually, we have to have approval from all the member agencies.
So June 11th, he said they meet again the last Wednesday in
June.
So we can meet June 11th and do that. And then if we could just ask, now that everybody has the details, if anyone has any questions, if we could get it to Mr. Endo, and then we'll be ready to vote on the 11th.
You all don't wanna do it on the 18th, is that too late? Is that what you're saying, the 18th is too late? Cause I think with the 11th being your budget public hearing, and you're not having a work session, and that may just.
We don't, it doesn't matter to us, it's, he's got a
Fine, because they
deadline.
don't meet, that won't matter to them.
What is your
They don't
deadline,
meet till
John?
the end of.
We just have to have a budget approved by July 1st. So the board of directors will meet again on June 27. And
Can you give us do you mind sending me the law, or have you already done?
I have, yeah, when the initial email,
Yeah, he cited it if maybe.
Title
you can't
58.
pull it.
Our attorney's asking for it, because she's just, I mean, we've never done that before, where the council is approving the budget. We don't wanna be holding them to any undue
Yeah, we've never done that.
liability. Y'all never approved the comments.
And he just said that we've never done it before, but he cited the law. If you could
Yes.
send that to our legal counsel.
chapter 25, section 582570, but I'll send that to you guys.
But I think that might be a, I think I saw that.
Can we have a,
Only to the county government, not the city?
no, he said every
Member
member
agency.
agency or we're a member agency.
I'll give you like a quick,
Look at that.
Yeah.
Can we get a motion to get an executive session, Mr. Duval?
Yeah, we'll.
And hold items 6, please.
so June 11? Okay, thank you so much. All right.
Thank you, John.
Madam Mayor Pro Tem, I move we go into executive session for discussion of employment of an employee pursuant
Sir.
So
to.
hold that,
You
hold
can
that.
hold all of item 6. We'll hold item 6.
Okay, hold on.
Yes, sir.
Item
Thank
seven.
you.
Discussion of the negotiation as proposed contractual arrangement pursuant to 30-4-78-2 Greenway easements, Capital City Stadium, Town of Eastover vertical construction project. Receipt of legal advice related to matters covered by attorney-client privilege pursuant to 30-4-78-2 receptacle requirements in Lower Richland sewer. Discussions of matters related to proposed location of or expansion of services to encourage location or expansion of industries or other businesses pursuant to 30-4-78-2 development incentives.
Thank you, Mr. Duval. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been properly moved in second. Ms. Moore, will you read the roll?
Mr. Rickman. Mr. McDowell.
Yes.
Mr. Duval.
Aye.
Mr. Badura.
Aye.
Mr. Vine.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Yes, sir.
If we could get food quickly and try and at least be sitting